At a water wheel structure, three figures stand together, a dark-haired man, a blonde girl with green eyes, and a blonde man in a suit, with the water wheel creaking behind them. One of them says the water wheel is just the beginning. Meanwhile, elsewhere, a red-haired girl with tears streaming down her face wonders who this person could be. In Kyle year 513, an official with a beard and military uniform begins the proceedings. He announces they'll now begin the execution of Baron Solis Takiel, former Lord of Esther. The execution will be carried out in accordance with the agreement made between Commander Weiss of the Graphonian Empire's Northern Expeditionary Force and Baron Solis. Meanwhile, Takiel hears the sound of a bell ringing and wonders where it's coming from. Takiel's body aches all over as he observes the central square of the town of Est, noting the pompous old bearded man giving a speech to the townspeople. He wonders what happened and recalls something about a public execution. Then, looking down at himself bound on the platform, he realizes that's him they're talking about. A dark figure confirms his observation. Takiel notes the air feels like he's about to be pelted with stones, but figures it can't be helped. He reflects on his territory. It was blessed with fertile land and an excellent lord, his father and mother having spent over a decade developing and protecting it. But everything started falling apart when he was a little over 10 years old. He lost his family and chief retainer to plague, suffered through a great flood, and his brother, who had a promising future, died in battle during the war. After all the disasters, what remained was just an ordinary person with no special talents. The calamities didn't stop though. A great famine struck, followed by an invasion from the neighboring country. Takiel knows people must have resented him greatly, calling him incompetent and a lord without authority. All he could do was exchange his life and a small amount of wealth to guarantee the lives and property of his people after the defeat. He hopes they can feel a little at ease now. As he prepares to finally be with everyone he lost, someone orders them to light the fire and the flames ignite. A voice suddenly calls out for Lord Takiel, and Takiel recognizes it immediately. Someone yells for people to get out of the way as a dark-haired girl named Anne pushes through the crowd. Takiel calls out her name, relief washing over him as he tells her he's glad she escaped the mansion attack safely. Then Anne crashes through the wooden execution platform structure with force, splintering the beams and collapsing on the ground in her cloak as she tries to reach Takiel. He calls out her name, telling her no. Takiel warns Anne that it's dangerous to stay back. But Anne's face shows tears and emotion as she thanks him for supporting her brother and sister as a maid of the Solis family. She starts to say something, but Takiel cuts her off, though Anne responds that she knows. Anne grips toward Takiel and tells him that no matter what anyone says, he always cherished his people. She bows deeply before him on the platform, prostrating herself between the guards and townspeople watching the execution. Meanwhile, more women step forward from the crowd. One speaks about how Takiel worked tirelessly for the people, sacrificing sleep to rebuild the crumbling territory. Another talks about how he fought alongside them during every disaster with only meager meals and beds. A third mentions how he ran around for the sake of the people during the plague without fear of infection, and they all say together that they know. Takiel looks at them in shock, recognizing them as Claire, Misery, and Rosa. He can't believe that even in this situation, they're praying and crying for him. Takiel tries to process this and wonders if he was always this popular. Then he notices they're beautiful women and laughs, saying he's happy even at a time like this. The scene shows him bound to the execution stake, surrounded by the growing crowd. But then Takiel's expression shifts as he notices something strange about everyone gathered around him. Suddenly, a strange bright light begins appearing, radiating intensely across the execution site. Someone in the crowd reacts in shock while another person asks what this light even is. Takiel's vision starts getting blurry and he wonders if it's from the smoke. He realizes this might actually be the end. Takiel thanks everyone and apologizes for being such a useless lord. Then a voice announces that with the manifestation of Takiel's skill, space-time magic will be bestowed upon him as bloodline magic, along with a territory appraisal skill. Takiel's face shows complete shock and confusion as he reacts to the timing of this awakening happening right now of all times. The voice explains how skills work when a lord awakens due to the loyalty of their people. Territory and presence determine a noble's value, and their absence determines their worth as well. Skills awaken to bring blessings to the people, but someone shouts that it's too late to awaken his authority now. Takiel realizes this is how it ends and shouts that he doesn't need any of this anymore. The world where Solis von Takiel lived came to an end, or at least, that's how it was supposed to be. A historical record states that in the year 493 of Kyle's reign, Takiel was born as the second son of Baron Solis. Meanwhile, Takiel finds himself unable to move his body and wonders where he even is. Someone notes his voice sounds kind of off, and Takiel realizes a hand might be growing out of him, but he's not sure. Then it hits him and he freaks out internally. He's a baby now. A system prompt appears asking whether to proceed, with yes or no options. Dense text explains the process, his authority activated at the moment of execution, and spacetime transfer will be performed using spacetime magic pushed to its absolute limit. The territory appraisal information has been compiled into a book documenting the history of the Solis barony. His soul, body, and the entire history of the Solis barony will be transferred together. Meanwhile, his previous body will be annihilated and replaced with a new vessel. But here's the catch: due to the extreme backlash from maxing out the transfer magic, both spacetime magic and bloodline magic will be sealed after use. Takiel doesn't remember trying to use bloodline magic as a last resort, but he enthusiastically chooses yes anyway. The system confirms the selection and announces that spacetime transfer will now begin. Then Takiel wonders if he was actually reborn through bloodline magic, but something feels off about that. Suddenly, Takiel realizes he actually pulled it off at the very end. Everyone's prayers must have given him the strength to make it happen. A book titled Soli's Barren History materializes right in front of him. He feels like he can see his father, mother, siblings, and everyone he fought alongside again. At this point, he doesn't care about maintaining composure anymore because he can see everyone's faces again. Someone observes that there's no atmosphere or anything, noting that he's just a baby, so of course he's bawling his eyes out. Takiel completely breaks down crying. Then Takiel's mother holds him and asks what's wrong. He recognizes her immediately. This is his mother, who died at the young age of 35 from a plague when he was 16, which means right now she's only 19 and so young. He stares at her in complete shock. His mother cheerfully suggests they eat together and smiles warmly, asking if he was just hungry all along. Baby Takiel stares at his mother in confusion, then completely loses it internally. He protests that the person in front of her may look like a baby, but inside he's a middle-aged man. He tells her to stop, but his mother just cheerfully asks if little Takiel-chan is hungry. Takiel thinks to himself that hunger is not the problem here. Meanwhile, the Solis manor stands against the cloudy sky outside. But despite his protests, Takiel admits he couldn't fight his infant instincts and gave in to being fed. He tries to remember what he was even trying to say. Then something hits him. He questions his own words about being a man in his late 40s. An older-looking blonde young man appears and the realization strikes. He was executed when he was 20, so even calling himself late 40s is clearly not right. Takiel notices a strange feeling washing over him. Fragmented images flash through his mind. Legs of adults walking past, himself as a baby crawling and exploring, someone working late at a desk, crowds of people, stacks of documents and books. The pieces start coming together and his eyes go wide with shock. Then more memories surface. Takiel sees scenes of people in a room, someone lying in bed, a figure working alone at a desk with a lamp in the darkness. He recognizes what he's seeing now. The memories are becoming clear. Suddenly, a desperate memory plays out. Hands reaching, a man's anguished cry asking why it had to happen when things were just about to start. He had finally thought everything was going smoothly and he could put his wife at ease. These are Nishida Takahiro's memories, and baby Takiel sits there processing the revelation. These are his memories from before he was born as Takiel. Baby Takiel's face twists with worry and pain. Takahiro's thoughts break through. What happened to his wife after that? If he's gone, his child will have no one. The baby is all alone now. Tears stream down as the weight of it all crashes over him. But then a gentle hand reaches down toward him. Someone softly tells Takahiro-chan not to cry. Takiel thinks about his mother as she appears in the doorway. His mother leans over him with a gentle smile, reassuring him that mommy is right here. Baby Takiel stares up at her young face, barely older than a teenager. A hand reaches down and wipes the tears from baby Takiel's face. A dark-haired man with a warm smile tells him he's ruining his handsome face. Takiel recognizes the figure immediately, his father, Baron Solis, smiling down at him with genuine affection. Then the scene shifts to playful chaos as someone yells for Dalek to stop it. The families gathered together now, playing with baby Takiel. His mother and father and what appears to be a sibling are all trying to cheer him up. The distraction works, and baby Takiel announces that his tears have dried up, his face breaking into a genuine smile as the family's warmth surrounds him. Meanwhile, the family sits together peacefully on a couch. Father, mother, baby Takiel, and his siblings are all present in a quiet moment of domestic happiness. But suddenly baby Takiel's eyes widen as reality crashes back in. He knows the sad end that awaits this family, and the questions hammer through his infant mind. Will he lose everything again? Will he have to repeat that same sadness and painful experience all over? Baby Takiel's face sets with fierce determination. He absolutely refuses to let that happen. He's going to avoid the tragic future that befell the Baron's family in the previous history. Standing in his mind's eye, he can see himself now and the shadows of who he was. He's going to change history, and he has two weapons at his disposal: his knowledge of the previous history and Nishida's modern knowledge. With those, he'll create a new history in this world and save his family. Baby Takyul's small hands reach forward as light gathers between them. He'll do everything he can to activate his authority and regain his time-space transfer skill. A figure in flowing robes appears in Takyul's mind as he thinks of the new future he'll return to from the first past, and of Yuko who waits for him there in that first past. A memory surfaces of hands at a meal table, dishes laid out from his life as Takahiro. Together with his wife Yuko, he'll create a new future as Nishida Takahiro too. His resolve becomes absolute. There's still so much the infant version of him can't do right now, but he has time to prepare countermeasures. With this, his resolve to walk this new future is set in stone. The Kyle calendar shows year 496, and Takyul is now 3 years old. His mother finds him reading again and marvels at how he just started talking recently, but is already devouring books like a genius. She tells him she has more work to do and asks him to be a good boy. Takyul responds that he will. As he continues reading, Takyul reflects that he's gained more freedom and started to see the world around him more clearly. He learned to read faster than anyone else and is now devouring books despite being stuck in this young body. Meanwhile, the Esther domain spreads out before him, remote land with much still undeveloped, yet the territory is vast and prosperous. This is the land governed by his family, the Solis baronial house. The civilization level seems equivalent to pre-industrial revolution medieval Europe, pretty much what anyone would expect from a fantasy world. The mansion isn't exactly luxurious, but it's respectable enough, exactly the sight someone would expect straight out of a classic fantasy. Then there's a figure standing shrouded in magical light, because in this world magic exists. Magic is revered as the mark of the nobles, the ruling class. The unique powers that serve as proof of a lord's nobility are broadly divided into two types: authority and bloodline magic. Each noble house has its own unique skill linked to its authority. Family members gain access to the same elemental type of magic that the lord can use, and once acquired, it never disappears. People bringing various blessings to both land and citizens create what's called authority, which is basically a general term for the effects that occur when a lord's territory reaches a certain level of development and loyalty among its people. The history of the Solis barony brought about a blessing of authority, and this reincarnation comes with bloodline magic. Takyul looks at the book before him with a pleased expression. The whole setup feels like something out of a fantasy light novel, and it makes him kind of happy. Then Takyul decides to start with the 5 calamities. By using not only the baronial chronicles but also other books and memories, he's managed to organize most of the information. When he puts the 5 calamities into a timeline, it looks like this. The Kyle calendar records the disasters. Year 503 brought the flooding of the Org River, the granary region, and the towns at its center were destroyed. In the war with the Empire, his brother was killed in battle, and the Baron's army suffered many losses and was weakened. Then year 506 saw plague claim his father, mother, sister, and steward, with 20% of the populace perishing. Year 509 brought a great famine, and the territory fell into hardship with another 20% of the people fleeing or dying of starvation. Finally, year 512 saw defeat by a large-scale imperial invasion and execution. The baronial line was wiped out. Takyul can only describe it as one disaster after another. Suddenly books fly through the air as Takyul throws them in frustration, yelling about what he can even do against the weather and enemies. An aside notes that ever since Takyul was a baby, he'd occasionally fall asleep with his head in his hands, and each time, his mother and maids would lose their minds over what they called Takyul-chan's cute pose. The maids gush over how adorable Takyul-sama is, striking that precious pose for the first time in ages. Meanwhile, there are countless problems piled up. Dealing with the flood of year 503 takes priority, but Takyul also needs to gather information on the international situation to prepare for the invasion from the neighboring Griffonia Empire, and the threat looms large. General Weiss is especially problematic. Known as the ever-victorious general, he's the one who led the imperial army to invade Esther in the previous history, and almost nothing is known about him. Takyul studies the timeline before him. 5 years remain until the first calamity, the Great Flood. There has to be a way. Takyul clenches his small fist with determination. He'll make it happen. Then 2 years pass. There was a time when Takyul used to think differently, but now he's 5 years old. The kid's grown up, tumbling around in the yard with his siblings. It's now year 498 of the Kyle calendar. Takyul's trying to calm himself down and organize everything, surrounded by stacks of books and papers. The timeline of disasters is getting clearer. The man lays it all out. A prosperous harvest back in year 499 caused grain prices like wheat to crash, cutting income drastically. Then a neighboring country's volcanic eruption and ashfall led to drought and famine spreading across the region. Discord erupted with nearby lords suffering from natural disasters, which indirectly led to his brother's death, when they were invaded by that very neighbor and fought desperately on the battlefield, but ended up losing 40% of their forces. Then the Org River overflowed in year 503, and their granary region along with its central town were completely annihilated. Suddenly, Takil realizes the pattern. The conflict with the neighboring lord a year later can't be ignored when considering its later effects. And on top of that, the following year brings even more trouble piling on. Year 499 was a year of great harvest, sure, but prices crashed as a result, delivering a huge blow to income. And the following year, it brought a terrible famine. The history of Baron Solis' domain hits differently now that Takil's actually living through it. There's no way he can get any information on the territory or domestic affairs since in the previous timeline, he was just a kid around this time. Meanwhile, his mother enters while he's working. Takil apologizes for bothering her while she's busy, but his mother asks what it is. Takil decides he'll start with what he can do. His mother tells him to ask her anything, clearly happy that he's coming to her with a favor. She thinks to herself how her child is adorable again today. Then Takil mentions that most civil officials can't even keep up with Mother when she's in what they call demon mode. Takil tells her he actually has a favor to ask. He's realized that starting with a construction project as his first move might seem pretty pitiful, but there's honestly no other effective way to handle what needs to be done. He requests permission to visit the workshop and head out into town. When his mother answered with that smile, it meant things were set in motion. A few days later, she made the arrangements, and Takil was granted permission to go out to the city of Est, but in exchange for two conditions. The first condition is to behave as befits a noble. Someone reminds him to mind his manners, and Takil excuses himself to leave. Then comes the second condition. Two excited female servants call out to Lord Takil, and he acknowledges them. One of them is Anne the maid, and she's the one who'll be accompanying him on his trip to the city. Takil and Anne arrive in the city of Est, and the blonde kid is completely blown away by how crowded the place is again today. So this is Est, the largest city in the territory of Esther, sitting right on the Kyle Kingdom's southernmost frontier. The city's surrounded by massive walls with a plaza smack in the center, and at the very back sits the Lord's mansion. The place is absolutely bustling with activity, and Takil notes that Est basically serves as the starting point for all distribution in the region. Mining, agriculture, trade, all the main sources of income flow through here. Then they hit up a food stall where this auntie presents some local dishes. Takil gets all excited and tells the auntie it looks delicious. The server calls out to Lord Takil, and he turns to Anne, asking if she wants to eat together, but suddenly something weird happens inside him. His commoner blood from his previous life as Nishida Takahiro starts stirring, since he ate this kind of street food all the time back then. The memory hits him hard being a young master from a baronial family, watching servants eat their food, but now he's living it from the noble side. Meanwhile, a woman at the stall offers to give them one too, saying she'll take 3 that are approved by the Baron's family. But Anne tells Takil they should get going and excuses them. Someone apologizes for startling them. The two of them head out and walk through the city streets in silence, just taking in all the sights of Est as they make their way toward their destination. Anne is the daughter of the head maid serving the Solis family, and Takil feels a bit awkward around her. The girl was strictly educated from a young age to become a maid, but she also has this natural talent for martial arts, especially swordsmanship. She's gotten so good that ordinary soldiers wouldn't stand a chance against her in a sword fight. Her father, a sergeant in the standing army, also taught her self-defense growing up. Anne is only 15 now and just became Takil's personal maid after finishing her apprenticeship. Apparently she's excellent as both a maid and a bodyguard. But as they walk through the city, Takil reflects on something heavy. The last time he saw Anne in his second life was when he was executed here, in this very city. In the previous timeline, Anne initially served as Takil's brother Dalek's exclusive maid and bodyguard. The two of them always practiced their swordsmanship together in the courtyard, and they probably got along well as master swordsmen. Then 3 years later, after Dalek died in battle, Anne went on to serve Takil's sister Klyja, but his sister also died of illness not long after. By age 30, Anne had taken over as head maid after her mother died from the plague. She had been in despair and withdrawn after losing 2 masters in quick succession. Takil reflects on all this as he walks with her through the city. It seems at this point he's already changed history. Suddenly, Anne notices something off and asks Lady Takil if something is the matter. Takil quickly responds that it's nothing and they should get going. Takil describes Anne as this dignified, quiet, red-haired super beauty. He admits that when she first became his exclusive attendant, she really disliked him. That's because when he does something unbecoming of a noble, she'll calmly and venomously scold him. But the way she scolds him is different. Meanwhile, Anne's parents constantly praise Takil, and he thinks to himself that being praised to death is actually painful. Takil apologizes again for not acting properly, admitting it's his fault for not acting like a noble. So he's taken to calling her Anne the Ice Woman on his own. He trusts her, of course, but he's a little scared of her. Meanwhile, Takil realizes he needs to be more careful about his behavior even in the workshop, figuring his parents probably think Anne will keep him in line. They arrive at the workshop and are greeted by workshop chief Geld, a muscular bearded man standing there with his arms crossed. Geld tells Takil this is no place for a noble young master. But Takil introduces himself cheerfully as Takil, second son of the Baron, here to visit the workshop today, joking that they probably think he's just a noble brat playing around. Anne reacts with displeasure at the situation while Geld makes a stern sound. Takil wonders if Geld is the type who's henpecked by his wife at home. Then Anne tells Takil he can look around as long as it doesn't interfere with their work, or rather, to his heart's content. Takil calls out as they enter the workshop. Inside, Geld is scolding one of his workers harshly, asking how he can serve such poor work to a customer, and demanding it be redone, asking how many times he has to tell the worker the same thing. Takil tries to get their attention, but the scolding continues. Anne suggests to Lord Takil that perhaps this situation is concerning. Suddenly, Geld quickly responds that it's fine, really fine, seeming to catch himself getting nostalgic but waving it off, telling himself never mind about that. Inside the workshop, Takil watches Geld yelling at the workers with intense energy. The atmosphere feels familiar to him, reminding him of a black company he knew before. He notes that while he's not exactly happy about it, there's something weirdly recognizable about this whole setup. Then the next day arrives, and some of the workers are talking among themselves about what kind of noble's son Takil actually is. Meanwhile, Geld observes that at his age, the kid isn't even scared of the harsh atmosphere in the workshop. Geld greets Takil with surprise, asking if he's here again. In a small aside, someone mentions they thought Takil would get bored after just one visit, but Takil quickly dismisses any concern, saying it's nothing. Takil reflects on how he keeps calling Anne the Ice Woman in his head, but watching the situation unfold, he realizes she's actually protecting him in her own way. Wood shavings and sawdust scatter across the workshop floor as work continues. The workshop atmosphere remains tense as usual, and Geld is clearly not in a mood to be talked to. But Takil refuses to let himself lose or give up. He announces he'll just watch and wait until Geld is free to talk. A worker approaches Takil asking which type is the hardwood. Takil hesitates, admitting he's a little busy right now trying to figure things out. Then another worker mentions the delivery date is coming up soon, asking what they're going to do about the situation. Meanwhile, Geld just stares at Takil silently. The young lord looks back at him, and then Geld makes a small sound of acknowledgement. Suddenly, a worker calls out to the young master. Takil responds immediately, his hand clenching with determination. But then Geld asks him directly if he likes woodworking. Takil thinks to himself that he can play along with this, but there's more to it than that. Takil explains there's something he really wants to make. He realizes that saying he likes it probably won't get the real message across though. It's not simply about liking woodworking. He pauses, then asks if what he wants to make has to be made from wood specifically. Takil answers with conviction that yes, it does have to be wood, and Geld's face shows shock at the determination in the kid's voice. He asks Takil if that's really the case. After that conversation, Takil starts going to the workshop almost every day. Geld greets Takil one day, telling the young man he's working hard. Takil responds by calling him master and promising not to disturb his work, asking to be taken care of today as well. This conversation becomes the catalyst for Takil to start talking to Geld more often, and that's how he ends up becoming good friends with the workshop master. Meanwhile, Anne considers whether she should show him that thing soon. Takil reflects that he's also gotten pretty close to the other craftsmen, and they treat him like a child, which is complicated considering his actual age. Then Geld looks at something Takil's shown him and asks what exactly it is. Takil explains he wants to make something out of wood that's resistant to wear and tear, something durable. He asks if there's such a wood and how to make a round shape like this. Anne watches from the side and thinks to herself that she just can't do it well herself. Geld calls out for Carl, but Takil's the one who responds, asking what's up. Geld explains that Carl's still young but the kid's got potential, then asks if the young master would be willing to use their guy Carl. A dark-haired young man in craftsman attire steps forward, and Geld introduces him, asking Takil to please take care of Carl. Carl and Takil shake hands, with Carl saying it's a pleasure to meet him too. Later on, Takil's leaving the mansion and calls out to his father and mother that he's heading out, wishing them a good day. Meanwhile, back inside, his parents start discussing the situation. Takil's mother mentions that their son isn't the type of kid who often asks for favors. His father responds that he wants to do it, so why not just let him do as he pleases. Then they note he's been coming in and out of the workshop almost every day again, recently wondering if Takil's actually doing okay. Takil's visits to the workshop end up lasting 3 months. After some time passes with his parents having these back-and-forth discussions, the visits just keep continuing. Inside the workshop, Takil works right alongside Carl and the other craftsmen. He asks if this is the right angle, adjusting something while commenting it needs just a little more like this. The workers respond positively, telling him that if he says so, it must be right. The model they've been working on, which is way too big to be a child's toy, is finally complete. The workers celebrate the completion. A few days later, Takil gets the opportunity to present in the mansion's courtyard, and the look on his face says he wasn't expecting this. The butler thanks everyone for taking time out of their busy schedules today. Takil's father and mother are both there in formal attire, looking pretty official. Then someone mentions there's one more person present. Another voice chimes in, explaining they'd also like to hear Lord Takil's proposal, so they've decided to join in. Takil looks completely confused at this unexpected addition to his audience. The guy is introduced as Raymond, the steward who manages the internal affairs and household of the Solis barony. He's basically a powerful figure, second only to Takil's father and mother in the entire household. Here's the thing though, he served Takil's mother even before she was married, and he demonstrated his abilities with his natural talent even after coming to the Solis family. The dude rose to the third rank in his 20s, which is pretty insane. Raymond tells Takil he's really looking forward to the results of his work in the workshop. Takil appreciates it, but then says he wants to be honest about something. Someone asks Raymond to please be gentle, while another voice notes the pressure is definitely on now. But then Takil reflects on something. Actually, in his previous life, he wasn't good with Raymond at all. When Takil's parents were still alive, he tried to bring them proposals several times, but each time Raymond pointed out so many flaws that Takil couldn't even make a sound in response. In the end, Raymond approved all of his proposals and reflected them in his domestic policies, but it almost broke Takil's spirit in the process. The narration describes Raymond as this refreshing, blonde, handsome guy who's crazy good at his job and can practically read his master's mind without even trying. He's basically the definition of a super competent steward, the type who's got all the elements of a popular character down pat. He's even got beauty marks, which apparently seals the deal. In fact, even the maids are total fans of him, and Takil notes he doesn't remember being that popular himself back in the day. Meanwhile, Takil reminds himself that he's an adult on the inside now, despite how young he looks. He acknowledges that while he's not exactly great at dealing with Raymond, there's no doubt the guy is trustworthy through and through. Raymond's participation here is completely unexpected, but this is actually a perfect opportunity. Takil turns to Anne and tells her to please begin, and Anne responds with a quick affirmative. Then Takil presents the mechanical device, telling everyone to take a good look at it. The contraption is this elaborate system of gears and mechanisms, pretty impressive stuff. But as he does this, Takil thinks to himself that Mr. Raymond is absolutely a necessary asset for altering history, someone he's gonna need on his side. Takil is determined to make Raymond an ally right here, right now. Meanwhile, the perspective shifts to Raymond's point of view, and he recalls that his first impression of Lord Takil was that the kid was straight-up creepy. Ever since Takil was a child, he'd look at Raymond with these eyes that seemed afraid or overly cautious. And the way Takil deliberately spoke in this stumbling manner made Raymond feel this weird, negative kind of cuteness from it. Raymond continues reflecting on young Takil, and strangely enough, the kid won the trust of everyone he interacted with, making them all his allies. Even the townspeople he met and the shrewd merchants who visited the mansion ended up on his side. So Raymond decided to assign Anne, the maid-in-training he'd reserved for his eldest son Dalek, to Takil instead, and he obligated her to report Takil's daily activities to him. From then on, every single day was truly astonishing. Raymond observed that Lord Takil was trying to devise and create tools he'd never seen before. These weren't just rare inventions. As Raymond watched the workshop filled with gears and mechanisms, with Anne assisting, he realized these were the things that might actually save this territory. Meanwhile, Baron Solis stares at the massive contraption and asks what it is. Takil's mother says it's amazing, then turns to Takil asking what in the world this thing is. Takil explains that these are called lifting water wheels and power water wheels, telling them he'll explain the lifting water wheel first. Then Takil demonstrates how it works. First, the water wheel gets submerged in the current and rotates. Then it pumps up water so the water flows to a higher position than before. When the water wheel is rotated by the power of water, the one with the gear attached changes its axis of rotation and continues to rotate horizontally to the ground, and the rod is repeatedly lifted and dropped by the rotation of the shaft. Someone watching comments that Takil is totally acting like a parent watching over their kid's science project. They note that Kryja is also good at playing house, and ask what they should do since Dalek already knows how to use a sword. They worry about spoiling the children, and someone remarks that Takiel's way of thinking is so old-fashioned. The realization hits, with this water-lifting water wheel, they can pump water to places higher than the river's water level. Takiel explains they can send water to land that couldn't be used as farmland until now. Raymond tells Takiel's mother that it seems she and her husband have realized this is no mere child's toy. Then Takiel explains that with this water wheel and gears, tasks previously done by hand can now be done by the water wheel nonstop. For example, if they use it to turn a millstone, they could mass-produce flour. Someone asks Lord Takiel how he thinks this could be useful, and Raymond contemplates the implications. The scene shows a map of the territory with various locations marked, including Lax, the Orc River, Esther, and Phobos. An explanation notes that if a certain place were destroyed for some reason, the damage would be immeasurable since the granaries of Esther are concentrated in one place. The increased production and automation directly affect the territory's economic situation. Raymond addresses Takiel, remarking that it seems like the kid knows one of the territory's problems. Takiel explains that he once read in a book about countries where such water wheel systems are used. Raymond asks where Takiel got this knowledge from. Meanwhile, Raymond looks at Takiel and wonders if utilizing the kid well in the Kyle Kingdom could help develop the territory. As he observes the child, Raymond notes that this person seems different somehow. Looking at Takiel's earnest expression, Raymond realizes something. It doesn't seem like the kid created these inventions out of childish interest, curiosity, or just wanting a challenge. Instead, it's like Takiel knows some kind of danger is coming, and he's desperately trying to avoid it. Raymond can't help but wonder what Takiel sees in his mind, and whether the kid possesses some magic skill like future prediction or something. Raymond's thoughts start to crystallize as he observes Takiel standing there against this dramatic background. That's exactly how it feels to Raymond, like Lord Takiel is carrying some great burden that nobody else knows about. Raymond considers the situation even further. Takiel is still just a child, so there's not much he can do on his own, and adults probably won't take him seriously. That's when Raymond decides that it's his duty to support Takiel both openly and secretly. So Raymond approaches Takiel to discuss the matter. The kid looks up at him expectantly. Raymond proposes that they should immediately start moving seriously, including reviewing the water wheel design and ramping up production. Takiel responds that it sounds good, realizing things are about to get pretty busy. Then Takiel's face lights up with gratitude and relief. He thanks Raymond sincerely for his support. Raymond smiles and acknowledges Takiel with a simple affirmation. The steward has made his commitment. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to show Takiel walking away through the mansion halls, with Anne standing nearby watching. With Raymond's strong backing, the survey of the installation site began the next day, and soon after, a large number of water wheels were officially ordered for the workshop. They began to be delivered one after another a few months later. The Solis family threw themselves into action. Takiel's father became busy developing new wholesale customers for flour, so he wouldn't miss this business opportunity. At the same time, Takiel's mother and Raymond focused on land development and arranging irrigation works. Takiel stands there with determination, realizing a major milestone has been reached. The first arrow that will change history has been fired, and he declares internally that he'll conquer the 5 great calamities of the early period. Then time passed, and a few months before the great harvest arrived, people worked the fields throughout the territory. Under this siege of constant preparation and development, Takiel remained focused and determined. Takiel declared internally that he wouldn't lose. A few days earlier, construction of a flour mill powered by the water wheel system had been underway. The water wheel presentation had gone smoothly, and now new farmland development and irrigation work were progressing throughout the Estral territory. But then Takiel realized there was one more thing he wanted to accomplish before the upcoming bumper harvest. See, Takiel wished the barony had bought up massive quantities of cheap wheat when prices plummeted due to the good harvest. It was a classic opportunity to buy low and sell high, earning money to deal with future disasters rather than just preparing for a great famine. For that strategy to work though, he needed a reason to justify buying up all that wheat. So he decided he had to create a product. His plan was to start developing dried noodles that could be stored for a long time and taste delicious with just hot water. Preserved food using wheat would be his answer. In the Solis barony kitchen, Takiel greeted Miguel, the head chef. Miguel, a muscular, dark-haired man, looked up and asked if the kid was back again. Now, Miguel was a soldier who had fought alongside Takiel's father in the same army. He was apparently good at cooking even back then, using only the limited ingredients available on the battlefield. After being wounded in battle, he became a chef at Takiel's father's invitation. Miguel was super close with Takiel's father and treated the kid without reservation. Takiel asked Miguel what was wrong today, then explained he was wondering if he could make preserved food with what they had. Takiel asked if he could borrow some ingredients. Miguel told him to go ahead. Miguel analyzed the approach, mentioning flour, water, and salt, kneaded, rolled out, and dried. He noted it was an unusual idea, but the territory would be able to make a lot of flour from now on. Takiel held up the dried noodles, thinking Miguel was exactly who he needed. If it went well, maybe the product could even be used on the battlefield, and Miguel was also an expert in portable rations for the battlefield. Takiel had learned many times before he turned 5 that he couldn't do anything alone. Knowing the history of the past and modern technology alone was useless. To change history, he needed the power of allies and professionals who would cooperate with him. From then on, it was the beginning of trial and error for the two of them. Miguel explained how he'd tried everything he could with salt ratios and drying methods, while Takiel worked enthusiastically with the noodles. But here's the thing, his parents had made him promise not to waste food. So all the leftovers and failed experiments from his attempts got served right back to him as meals. Young Takiel struggled through eating them, finding it pretty hard to choke down. But after several weeks of this hardship, Takiel finally tasted success and declared it was good. Takiel was thrilled that he'd made it just in time for the big harvest and thanked Miguel for all the help. During a family dinner, Takiel reflected on the challenges he'd faced. The Kyle Kingdom was a landlocked country, so it was incredibly hard to get ingredients for dashi, and there was no soy sauce or miso in this world either. If he thought something was missing, it was definitely the seasoning. At the table, someone mentioned that Klaija wanted to eat something too, and that's when Takiel realized he needed one more push, a selling point that would make his father jump at it. Takiel looked determined as the realization hit him bamboo could be the answer. If bamboo tubes could serve as both a storage container and cooking utensil, it would be the perfect solution. This would be the birth of instant noodles in another world. As a result of people thinking that monster habitats would expand regularly, they'd been cutting down bamboo, and bamboo was being distributed as a material. The thing about bamboo is it's prolific. If left alone, it spreads like crazy. Green bamboo was super easy to get. To the south of the Esther territory, this vast bamboo forest stretched out, also serving as the border with the demon realm where monsters lived. However, probably due to image issues, demand was low and bamboo was actually in surplus, so Takiel decided to start making cup noodles. The process was pretty simple. First, make a hole in a cut bamboo tube and stuff it with dried noodles. Second, add water and Miguel's special seasoning, then boil it over a fire. Third, enjoy the delicious soup and flavorful noodles. It smelled amazing. Takiel thought it sounded like an omikuji fortune. There were some mishaps though. At one point, the noodles just wouldn't come out. Miguel helped him again and the cup noodles were completed safely. Miguel was humming in the kitchen while cooking, and Takiel held up the bamboo noodle cup, confident that his father would surely jump at this with wide eyes. He'd call it omikuji dried noodles. Now he could sell this to his father under the guise of wartime logistics and disaster preparedness. Suddenly there was a sound. Takiel heard a crashing noise and the bamboo cup fell. He couldn't believe what was happening. Takiel realized the moisture in the green bamboo was the problem. His face showed nothing but frustration with the setback. Thing is, if he used dried bamboo as a container, the bamboo itself would just burn completely. He needed to think of something other than bamboo, but whatever it was had to be cheap and readily available. Takiel collapsed in defeat, hoping that styrofoam hadn't fallen out of existence in this world. Despite that frustrating experience, several months passed by. And finally, a year of great harvest arrived, which also marked the beginning of the 5 great calamities of the previous period. Then a title card appears displaying History of the Solis Barony, Omen of Destruction. It explains that in Kyle year 499 during autumn, the people rejoiced in the bountiful harvest. But excessive bounty turned into disaster, and joy turned into resentment. The beginning of a year of blessings brought black ash from a neighboring country to the skies of Esther. Meanwhile, Baron Solis stands in the wheat fields with 6-year-old Takiel beside him. The Baron looks pretty optimistic, saying at this rate they'll have a pretty good harvest this year. Takiel responds that he's looking forward to the autumn harvest. Later on, the Baron examines the grain and notices something off. He mentions ash from the Griffonia volcano and hopes it doesn't get too bad. The situation feels ominous. Takiel is now 6 years old in this timeline. The thing is, ashfall from a small volcanic eruption in the neighboring Griffonia Empire has begun, and Takiel had been waiting for this exact moment. Anne approaches Takiel, letting him know it's almost time for the proposal meeting. Takiel thanks her. As he prepares, Takiel reflects on his decision. He's using this whole ashfall situation to push through his own proposal. See, the thing is, he needed to stir up a sense of crisis to put the next arrow into action. Now, according to the history of the barony of Tsuris, the ashfall itself actually subsided pretty quickly, and there wasn't any direct damage or major disruption. But here's the kicker. This year's gonna bring an unprecedented bumper harvest. However, what's waiting for them the following year is a great famine. Takil understands they've got to somehow overcome this great famine. If they fail here, their hope of facing future calamities will be completely crushed. Mass production of flour, development, and commercialization of portable preserved foods, all of that's on track, but this alone isn't gonna be enough. On top of that, they can't expect any support from neighboring countries or other territories. The scene shifts to show two neighboring nobles, Viscount Kakaman and Viscount Mimibai High, with their family crests displayed. The Solis barony, which has grown rapidly in the last decade, isn't exactly well regarded by these two neighboring viscounties. Someone says yes and another voice chimes in with let's go. The atmosphere is tense, to say the least. Meanwhile, the only friendly neighboring territory, the Cornell barony, places even more emphasis on agricultural production than Esther does. Then there's the Southern Griffonia Empire, which would be constantly at war, so that's a non-starter. Bottom line, they had to overcome the Great Famine on their own. The scene shifts to the Solis barony conference room, where Takil stands looking extremely nervous. His mother and other family members are present all around him. The setting feels completely different from his presentation at the water wheel, way more intense. Takil reflects that he's only 6 years old, yet here he is about to meddle in the management of the entire territory. Meanwhile, someone else in the room appears concerned at his involvement, and honestly, Takil feels really nervous too. He recognizes this is completely different from that water wheel presentation. The narration explains that the current prosperity of the Esther territory is actually the fruit of his parents' efforts over the years. Apparently, it was said to be an underdeveloped territory with no particular industry whatsoever. When his father was first granted this land, it was just dotted with small towns and villages, nothing special. But here's the thing, Takil's father is a spatial mage with excellent spatial storage abilities, capable of storing the equivalent of several large trucks worth of goods. Then there's Takil's mother, who's an earth mage specializing in land appraisal, which means she can discern the characteristics of any land. So his father personally traded with the harvests from the cultivated lands, handling business directly. Meanwhile, his mother discovered and developed mines, which greatly increased their assets over time. His mother further invested in development projects, creating this positive cycle that allowed the Esther territory to grow into a domain said to be superior even to higher-ranking viscounties. Some nobles apparently mocked the baron as the merchant baron, but the lord himself engaging in trade and business like a merchant actually seems to appeal to him. He seems to genuinely like it. Meanwhile, in the conference room, someone comments on the bountiful harvest this year and how the villagers are delighted. Raymond congratulates Takil's father on the good news. Takil reflects on how his parents are incredible people who built this entire territory in just one generation, and he wonders if his proposal will actually be accepted. The narration explains the basic economics of the harvest. Farmers pay their harvested grain as tax, and from that they secure seeds for the next year and food for themselves. The rest they sell to earn income. But here's the thing, a bountiful harvest can actually be troublesome if it's too much, which is exactly what's bothering Takil. The narration goes on to explain that in this world, taxes are determined by the size of the land and aren't proportional to the harvest. If there's a bountiful harvest, the farmer's share increases, and if there's a poor harvest, it's the opposite. The same goes for the Lord, or rather, the scale of the problem becomes even greater. If the harvest is too bountiful, the price of grain will fall, and as a result, the farmer's income will actually decrease. Someone responds that a bumper harvest sounds most welcome. Then Takil presents his proposal, explaining he's brought something asking them to consider the problems a great harvest can create. Someone asks Takil to share his reasons and those 3 points. Raymond notes that it'll let House Esther build its strength and act before the coming crisis. A bumper harvest is the perfect chance to push ahead with the 3 measures Takil will outline now. The Baron agrees to hear him out. Meanwhile, someone else wonders what Takil is babbling about now. Takil presents his first point about dried noodles. He suggests using dried noodles to cover some of the stockpiles in preparation for a food crisis. Now that grain prices are falling, it's the perfect time to start producing preserved foods. The development work is currently under progress, and they're also developing dried noodles that can be used on the battlefield. Takil shows a document to his mother. They're also considering paying farmers whose incomes have decreased to engage in this work. Takil assumes everyone has already factored this in. Takil breaks down the second point, the construction of a granary called a jisu to store grain in preparation for poor harvests, along with a whole system to make it work. He pulls out a diagram showing how everything fits together. The farmers provide their surplus grain to the jisu, and the barony buys it at the same price as usual. By doing this, they can reduce how much flows into the market, suppress price drops, and stabilize the farmers' incomes. Meanwhile, the stored grain gets saved up and distributed when emergencies hit. The farmers earn the same income as usual by handing over their surplus, and the barony can instruct them to store it in the jisu for free. The Baron finds it a pretty interesting idea. Raymond offers his assistance, and Takiel thanks him like always. Someone in the room comments that it's not bad, then notes that Takiel will also earn the gratitude and loyalty of the Lord. Takiel recognizes this is the real deal now. He moves on to the third and final point. The Baron mentions he's seen several books that state small-scale ashfall is considered a precursor to a large-scale eruption. Takiel explains that if there's a large-scale eruption in a neighboring country, crops will be damaged and there'll be a famine. Someone reacts to the mention of famine. Takiel suggests they should buy up grain this year when it's cheap. It's a good opportunity to support both stockpiling and speculation. The Baron looks concerned. Takiel admits he can't say for sure, but there's a high probability it'll happen. He reflects internally that the story about the books is a stretch, and even if he honestly told them he knew the future, they wouldn't believe him. He's been agonizing over this for years, but this was the only way he could think of to convince them. Takiel continues his plea, saying that even if there isn't a famine, he thinks they should promote commercialization as one of their future industries. Takiel stands in the grand hall with dramatic light streaming down around him. He calls out for them to believe him. Suddenly, his mother's voice rings out, calling his name. Takiel's mother rushes to him and pulls him into an embrace. She tells him he really is something, her voice thick with emotion. Takiel realizes what's happening and calls out to his mother in surprise. She pulls him close and thanks him for thinking so much about them, telling him to leave what happens next to them. Takiel processes her words. Then Baron Solis announces his afternoon plans are changing. He tells them they're getting to the bottom of this. Finally, things are moving forward. Takiel reflects that he thought he finally did one thing for his parents. The image shows him walking alongside his father, this small figure next to the Baron. This feeling had been stuck in the back of his mind for a long time. He wonders about the version of himself from the previous timeline who didn't try to do anything, whether it was because he felt inferior to his brilliant brother and parents, or because he was just afraid to try. That he kept running away until it was too late. But the same was true for Nishida Takahiro. Even though he had received so much from them, he couldn't return anything before they were separated forever. Takiel reflects on his past life as Nishida Takahiro, a humble Japanese salaryman who lived happily with his beloved wife despite having no children. Growing up, he was bullied in childhood and developed this personality that constantly worried about what others thought. He was terrible at asserting himself, and the results of his hard work were stolen by colleagues, knocking him off the path to promotion. Before he knew it, he had become what people would call a middle-aged NEET, spending every day at home just devouring light novels. His wife Yuko, whom he'd been married to for 20 years, had gone out to work to support their household which had lost its breadwinner. She encouraged him, telling him she was sure he could do amazing things and to please seize a bigger opportunity than some half-hearted job. He continued to rely on her like that. Then his wife collapsed from overwork and stress, the very thing he'd been struggling with himself. When he finally recovered from his coma and saw his wife looking haggard and worried sick about him, he just wept. The guy cursed himself for putting her through all this. After he woke up, he worked desperately, taking any job he could get his hands on. Gradually, his income stabilized and his wife's bright smile finally returned. But despite being almost 50 years old, he kept pushing himself way too hard. This time, though, he collapsed and left his wife behind for good. See, Nishida and Takiel, they're both him, the same person. He was afraid to take a step forward, kept running away instead of facing things head-on, and by the time he actually looked forward, it was already too late. But this time, it's different. He has two people's regrets and two people's desired futures within him now. One by one, he can change things, make them right this time. Meanwhile, autumn of Kyle year 499 arrives, and the harvest season was about to begin. Kyle calendar 499, early autumn, finally the season of the great harvest arrived. The wheat in this world seems to be a little later than the wheat Takiel knows from his past life. At first, the farmers rejoiced at the unprecedented bumper harvest they were seeing. However, that joy gradually turned into anxious voices worried about falling market prices. Takiel's mother and Raymond preempted this whole situation by issuing a decree for the construction of granaries, which calmed the farmers down. By this time, the construction of granaries had already been decided one after another throughout the region. Perhaps there was a similar plan originally in place. Takiel was happy that they seemed to have believed everything he said and prepared for it accordingly. Eventually, a massive drop in grain prices occurred, just as written in the Baron's historical records. Takiel's mother and Raymond immediately took action. The grain from the domain's farmers was bought up at a price higher than the market rate. New dry noodle processing plants were built next to the newly installed water wheels in various locations, and farmers whose incomes had decreased were hired as the mass production of processed goods and preserved foods progressed. At first, Takiel was just watching, but as soon as the second ashfall occurred, he became eager, seeing it as an excellent investment opportunity. Takiel declared his time had come. Since the market crash, he'd been frantically traveling around with his eyes gleaming, and his siblings observed that he was doing well. This was the true power of spatial magic, spatial storage. Takiel was even planning to sell processed food to the royal capital's knights. And behind the scenes, he was diligently buying up wheat from other territories at a low price, while making sure Baron Solis' name didn't come up. On the surface, it was part of a buy-up to support the market, but Raymond observed that Takiel's methods were flawless. Baron Solis, who was in high spirits and a good mood, called Takiel to his office one day. The father told him that if they made a profit from wheat and preserved food, he'd give Takiel 10% of the profits. Takiel's mother exclaimed in surprise, and Chibai Takiel celebrated it as a blessing. Later, Takiel mentioned he tried to recreate a scene from his favorite light novel. His mother recorded the moment and said she got it on record. Even though it was just a whim, Takiel was so happy, but his father was disgusted by the whole thing. Baron Solis reasoned it was only natural for a lord. He guessed it was fine since they acted like completely different people outside. Meanwhile, there were concerns flying around about whether something like this really needed to be done by twin maids with short blue hair, and worries about the grain market crashing everywhere. The father still questioned if this was really okay. Takiel explained that this was for the territory, so he'd continue to have them fly around outside the city. Someone remarked that sounded nice. Then Takiel's mother thought to herself that this was also perfect for preparing the third arrow. Takiel internally confirmed his resolve. Later, Takiel approached his parents asking if he could go inspect the granary construction site. But Baron Solis protested that Takiel was still only 6 years old and it wasn't safe outside. He added that it wasn't something the Lord's son should go out of his way to see. Takiel pleaded with his father and mother, saying he really wanted to go. His mother asked why, so Takiel explained that his brother and he would manage the domain's internal affairs in the future. He believed it was important to hear the voices of the people directly in order to support them. He'd proposed a granary for the people, but he didn't know the feelings of the people who would actually receive the policy. But then someone questions why this has to happen now. The dark-haired man responds that no matter how grand the justification is, it doesn't change the fact that Takiel is exploiting the farmer's anxieties. Takiel insists he needs to see with his own eyes how the villagers are receiving it. Later on, Takiel reflects on his preparation. He's even eliminated the childish words he intentionally used before, making his speech sound way more adult. He considers this a perfect justification if he does say so himself. Then someone asks if that's really all there is to it. Takiel struggles internally, wondering what he's missing. He notices this strange smile on her face and questions what kind of reaction that even is. She doesn't seem to be adamantly refusing, but something isn't quite right. He wonders if maybe it's his desperation showing through. Then suddenly, Takiel shouts that he wants to see the outside world too. He wants to see the land of Estel that his father and mother made prosperous. He complains that it's not fair only his brother gets to go. But Takiel immediately realizes his mistake. With a total age over 70, he accidentally just blurted out an excuse he'd already rejected in his own mind. The whole thing's kind of embarrassing, though someone responds positively, saying that's more like it. That's when Takiel realizes if that's his mom's switch, he was attacking from the wrong side this whole time. His mother agrees, saying she'll allow him to go outside the city, but only if he's accompanied by Raymond. Anne has to come along too, and safety is the top priority. She explains that this whole condition exists because he's been going out with Dalek on his own lately. But then Chris interrupts, and someone immediately tells him to stop. Chris asks how anyone could possibly not understand a younger brother's desire to imitate his older brother. Meanwhile, Takiel's mother asks if he's dissatisfied with her permission. Someone warns in the background not to go against her. Then Takiel's father agrees with her decision. Takiel responds that he understands, telling his father not to interfere with Raymond and not to say anything unnecessary at the site. And so Takiel's wish to accompany Raymond on his inspection was finally realized. The group heads out, Raymond, Anne, and Takiel walking through the streets with their escort. Raymond explains that in this world where monsters and bandits roam, even traveling within their own territory carries a certain amount of risk. But since the Lord's young son was going, they had no choice but to increase the number of guards accompanying him, so Takiel apologizes for increasing their workload. Still, Takiel was happy to be able to go outside the town, though permission to accompany Raymond was only granted for 3 villages and 1 town near Est, places that could be reached in a day trip. Takiel leans out the carriage window as they prepare to depart, calling out to his father and mother that he's heading off, and the inspection proceeded smoothly under Raymond's direction as the carriage rolls away. At the first village they stopped at, Takiel accidentally messed up again, but Raymond did a good job of explaining things from the next village onwards, using maps and diagrams to show the former territory. Meanwhile, Takiel wanted to see Anne's reaction, thinking about her winking, But Raymond seemed confident both Anne and himself would keep quiet to his parents about his rampage. Then the third arrow plan, the final strategy against the Great Famine, quickly yielded results. Raymond helped Takiel with the third arrow on the way, and the inspection ended successfully, with Takiel calling out again to his father and mother. Late autumn, Kyle year 499 arrives, and Takiel holds up a magnificent turnip triumphantly, showing off the impressive harvest to everyone around him. Anne and another character react emotionally to the sight, clearly moved by what they're seeing. Meanwhile, someone comments that soon Takiel's gonna be called the farmer baron, then turns to Chris asking since when did their family become farmers. The comments made that it's all a bit much, especially with all the empty space in the mansion being used for this. But Takiel just holds up the turnip even more enthusiastically, explaining that turnips are easy to grow and delicious, plus even the leaves can be eaten. As a measure against food shortages, he focused entirely on turnips. Turns out they're cultivated in this world but only as fodder, which was honestly a complete waste. There's even an anecdote that the brilliant strategist Zhuge Liang cultivated turnips at his camp. Someone mentions they also like Romance of the Three Kingdoms. So here's how Takiel pulled it all together. First, during his inspection, he asked Raymond to investigate the cultivation status of various regions, figuring the best way to learn how to grow them is to ask the local. Then Takiel asked his father to find connections to obtain turnip seeds and turnips themselves from merchants visiting the town, making sure to ask through his mother, of course. He also asked Miguel to research delicious cooking methods and create recipes. Takiel compiled all the gathered information from everyone, and now his dinner table's completely full of turnips. The plan is to distribute them to various places across the territory during times of poor harvest, along with the stocked seeds. Meanwhile, in parallel with all the compilation work, Takiel was conducting trial cultivation. Anne tells him he's got mud on his face. Takiel thanks her, commenting that his bodyguard is way too much of a bodyguard. Takiel was totally bracing himself for Anne's scolding, but surprisingly she's actually helping out with the harvest instead. Takiel asks his brother if he won't harvest with them too. After a moment of hesitation, his brother agrees. Then Takiel stands on a hill overlooking the fields, thinking that it would be a real problem if he were invited to a famine anyway. He's done all he can at this point, so he challenges the Great Famine to come on and bring it. Kyle calendar 500 arrives, bringing with it the omen of destruction. The black arm of the mountain god's wrath crosses the border and covers the southern part of the kingdom, bringing absolute heavenly disaster. After the dark clouds pass without any merciful rain, the land dries up hard. People start starving and wandering around in hunger, and hearts are seriously disturbed. The mountain god of Graphonia shows nothing but pure wrath. In the spring of Kyle calendar 500, in the city of Est, young Takiel asks his mother if the sky will stay all black again today. His mother confirms it, so Takiel worries if the sun is sleeping and whether it'll stay dark forever. But his mother reassures him that everything is okay, telling him that the Lord's blessings will surely help them and the people. A month later, the cloudy sky finally turns blue. Everyone's rejoicing at the long-awaited sunlight, and the land begins showing signs of recovery as plants start growing again in the dried earth. But the rain still doesn't fall, meaning if this continues, the crops are gonna wither. Anxiety's threatening to engulf everyone's hearts once again, but Takiel's mother doesn't miss the subtle change that's occurring. She takes immediate action, commanding her workers to activate all the water-lifting wheels. She orders them to open the sluice gates and send as much water as possible to the fields, reminding them to always adjust the sluice gate to divert even a little of the diminished river flow into the irrigation channels. The workers respond quickly and get to work. As the mother watches the operation unfold, she reflects on the whole situation. This is exactly the omen of a poor harvest that her child spoke of. She knows they're not the only ones in the basin who need water, but she's determined not to let the river dry up completely. The mother thinks about how critical the preparations were. If they didn't have the watermill, if they didn't have the stockpiles for emergencies, that child would have faced complete disaster. Meanwhile, young Takiel summons Raymond and instructs the steward to keep him updated on information from all areas, even the smallest changes, even things that seem totally unrelated. Raymond acknowledges the order, addressing him as Lord Chris, confirming he understands. Then Takiel declares they should do what they need to do now. The mother's instructions are immediately carried out in various places throughout the territory. Cheers rise from the farmers in the areas where water finally arrives. Furthermore, the mother and Raymond issue proclamations throughout the territory through the executive branch, concerned with tax burden reduction and redistribution of grain from the granaries. As intended, these measures seem to contribute to the stability of the people's minds. In the regular conference room, Baron Solis remarks that all the measures are going well then. Raymond confirms this is the case. The farmers say they'll only have to cut back a little on their living expenses. The Baron acknowledges they can't let their guard down, but they still have room to maneuver in terms of reserves and finances. Meanwhile, Takiel overhears this conversation and wonders if they might actually make it through the crisis. Standing in the hallway afterward, Takiel reflects on his uncertainty. He wasn't sure if that assessment was correct. He had a feeling things were going well based on the fragmented information he'd been gathering, but to be honest, he was anxious until someone could confirm it for him. Now that confirmation has come, and Takiel feels overwhelming relief. He's overcome the first major disaster. Back in the present timeline, Baron Solis is receiving reports about the territory's progress. Turnip cultivation is going well in various places across the land. Takiel's mother tells the Baron they can welcome winter with peace of mind, and everyone is grateful to him. Then young Takiel excitedly chimes in with praise for his father. The narration explains that not only has their territory succeeded, but they're even providing food aid to the neighboring territory that got rich by speculating. This should help resolve the discord between them. Pretty solid turnaround, honestly. They've successfully overcome both the poverty of a good harvest and the famine of a bad harvest. Only 2 of the 5 major disasters from the previous timeline remain. After the meeting wraps up, Takiel returns to his room and examines his timeline documents. The records detail the disasters from years 499 to 503, the wheat price crash, income decrease, the neighboring country's volcanic eruption and ashfall on October 10 of year 501, discord with neighboring lords who suffered from the king's divine punishment spread, his brother Dalek's death after being invaded by the country of Shun and fighting alone on the battlefield with 40% force losses, the Org River flood, and the destruction of towns in the granary and settlement areas. Yeah, it's a lot. Walking down the hallway, Takiel suddenly hears voices coming from his father's office. His thoughts reveal the exhaustion hitting him now that they've avoided the bad harvest. The guy hasn't been able to relax at all. He jokes darkly that today he'll either rest well or die from overwork and reincarnate in another world, though dying from overwork there wouldn't be funny either. Then Takiel realizes this strange behavior is what the earlier scene was all about. From inside the office, he can hear someone lamenting about being called the Turnip Baron and having to suffer like this. They plead for it to stop. Takiel firmly denies it's his fault, though he adds a tentative qualifier at the end. In year 500 of the Kyle calendar, someone discovers Takiel in an unusual pose in his room and reacts with total shock. And the maid chimes in, noting that unfortunately the other maids aren't cute at all. Like, why would they even do that? Meanwhile, another voice asks what the whole diplomatic issue is about, wondering if Takiel's studying or what he could possibly be so worried about. Turns out Takiel's examining documents and maps related to the turnip situation. See, in the previous timeline, a famine caused grain prices to skyrocket, which led to conflict and completely deteriorated relations with neighboring territories. But this time around, their territory is self-sufficient, so those kinds of disputes haven't even occurred. On top of that, they've provided free grain and offered to sell turnips to maintain good relations. However, relations with the Gorman Viscounty to the west have still deteriorated anyway. Through the steward who represented the arrogant Viscount's family, the offer of turnips was firmly rejected. The Viscount declared that taking advantage of a natural disaster to hoard food and make a profit through speculation is a despicable act unworthy of a nobleman. Then a dark-haired figure asks if eating animal feed is something a nobleman should do. The narration mentions that Viscount Hiorimi from the east is in a similar situation and is being talked about terribly as well. Then the complaints escalated even further. The Viscounts protested that the upper class has nothing to do with what the lower class does, and they even started complaining about water rights during the drought. Meanwhile, the document reference shows Kyle year 506 of the Solis family, noting that a proud young light swordsman falls into an ally's trap and ends up isolated. Takiel reflects on the day he first lost his family. Only 5 years remain until that fateful day arrives. His brother Dalek was a strong swordsman who saved many soldiers and fought hard, but then the light fell and never returned. The difference in power wasn't enough to cost him his life, but if only he hadn't been betrayed by his allies. In the farming villages of the neighboring territories, people starved to death, and the destitute flowed into the cities, filling them with cries of resentment. Then when winter truly set in during Kyle calendar year 501, the food problem for both families reached a complete deadlock. People began abandoning their farms and fleeing to the Estel territory. However, despite such dire circumstances, Viscount Gorman's attitude remained unchanged. Not only Takiel's parents but even Raymond were at their wits' end. Takiel mutters to himself about crushing the Gorman noble family now, then catches himself for speaking his mind aloud. 1 month later, the situation has gotten even worse. Someone reports that the number of refugees is extremely high, and Takil looks out the window, observing the crisis unfolding right before his eyes. Meanwhile, in the Solis household, Takil's mother discusses the city's security concerns. Baron Solis listens as voices of worry reach them about refugees entering Esther. Suddenly, young Takil bursts in calling for his mother, announcing he has a proposal and requesting his father be summoned as well. Baron Solis finds the request interesting and agrees to hear it. Takil's mother agrees enthusiastically, saying they'll absolutely do it. Later, the city of Esther fills with refugees. Cloaked figures with walking staffs wander the streets while others lie exhausted on the ground. The neighboring territories have begun accepting refugees as well. Takil reflects on how changing history inevitably creates new events that never occurred in the previous timeline. The discord with both viscounts and this influx of refugees serves as a stark reminder of this fact. But at this moment, though, he has no idea what's coming next. An armored figure stands ready with an ornate blade. It's Captain Weiss. Takil narrates that he had no clue the worst flag was waiting for him right around the corner. The protagonist introduces himself as Solis von Takil, second son of the Solis family who govern Esther, the southernmost frontier territory of the Kyle Kingdom. He's now living his third life. His first life was as Japanese salaryman Nishida Takahiro. Back then, he became a NEET, caused his wife Yuko endless trouble, and when he finally pushed himself too hard trying to make up for it, he overworked himself to death and left her behind. His second life was as Takil, the Solis family's second son. Struck by one calamity after another, he lost his brother, parents, and sister, basically his whole family. In the end, he was defeated by an invading army and executed, or at least that's what was supposed to happen. But at the moment of death, the authority granted only to a lord manifested. The spacetime magic activated, and before he knew it, he had become the infant Takil again. His third life had begun. He would rewrite the sorrowful history of the past and protect his family, and on top of that, he invoked spacetime magic once again to relive his first life as Nishida and bring happiness to his beloved wife Yuko. Year 501 of the Kyle calendar, and Takil is now 8 years old. The kid celebrates finishing his daily assignments, and thanks to his previous lives as Nishida and Takil, he can breeze through everything first thing every morning. In this world, noble education only goes up to about 15 years old, and he already completed all that curriculum in his previous life's history, so he's all studied up. Life in his third timeline is off to a strong start. Anne asks if Takil is heading out, and someone responds that he is. Meanwhile, another voice offers to accompany him. The scene shows young Takil preparing to leave while Anne stands nearby in her maid uniform. Then Anne rushes forward, offering to get Lord Takil's coat, but Takil waves her off, insisting it's fine. The household staff swarms around the young lord as he prepares to depart. Suddenly, Takil's siblings lift him up playfully. His brother asks if he's going out again. The narrator identifies the eldest son as Solis von Dalek, 11 years old. Someone calls out to their brother, and Dalek mentions that the prodigy finished his assignments in no time again today. Dalek points out that's what Takil says, but actually he's just too good at everything, then asks him to think about how that makes Dalek look. Takil gives an awkward response. Then the narration shifts to the previous timeline. In that timeline, Takil admired someone so much that no matter what he did, he couldn't match them and lost confidence over and over again. Meanwhile, in battle at age 13 and by 16, her martial fame had spread so widely that neighboring lands grew wary of her skill and charisma. By 13, she already showed insane sword talent, and at 14 she fought her first battle. The scene shows a female warrior going at it in some seriously fierce combat. Suddenly, someone asks what's wrong, noticing that Takil is just staring at their face. Takil thinks to himself that this is one of the futures he absolutely has to change, because if things continue the way history says, his brother will die in battle 5 years from now. The scene shifts to a more playful moment where someone accuses Takil of hiding something again. Takil frantically denies it, insisting there's nothing at all. Later on, they arrive at the Est City Special Refugee Camp sector. Takil cheerfully announces he'll buy something tasty from a street stall on the way home. Anne observes that things are finally calming down quite a bit. Takil agrees, crediting everyone's effort. The narration explains their domain of Estel managed its water supply through water wheels and introduced preserved foods and public granaries to avoid famine. But then, last year in the southernmost frontier of the Kyle Kingdom, natural disasters struck ashfall from a volcanic eruption in neighboring Griffonia, followed by a brutal drought. The Viscounty to the east and west suffered disastrous crop failure, and refugees with nowhere to go began pouring into the city of Est as well. Takil reflects that if the city overflows with refugees, public order will deteriorate. Besides, he could never bring himself to abandon refugees who arrived suffering from hunger and cold. The narration describes how refugees scattered throughout the city have been gathered in one place and are now receiving necessary support. Takil used his modern knowledge to propose the fourth measure, a refugee relief plan. Under the leadership of Steward Raymond, a designated area within the city was set up to accommodate them, complete with temporary housing and food distribution. The dried noodles are a big hit, along with warm soups. Takil suggests they drop by the reception office again today for now, and Anne agrees. At the refugee camp registration office, staff members are directing the arriving refugees to line up in order. Signs plastered everywhere announce that registration is required for everyone. Claire, the cheerful blonde registration staff member, sits at her desk, ready to process the newcomers. She tells the next refugee in line that she'll fill out the register now, asking them to provide their name, gender, age, former occupation, and the names of any companions. She also asks where they came from. The refugee responds that they're from a village east of Esther, and Claire writes diligently as she records all the information. Then Claire confirms that the registration is complete. She hands over a registration tag, explaining that it'll be needed when being introduced to jobs like refugee camp work or food distribution, so they shouldn't lose it no matter what. Anne chimes in, explaining to Takil that since the tags are managed by number, refugees aren't allowed to trade them with anyone. The refugee thanks them both. Anne points out the bulletin board where job postings are displayed, mentioning that even the refugee camp setup itself hires laborers from among the refugees. The refugee thanks them again before moving on. Claire calls for the next person in line after finishing with the previous refugee, reminding them that if anything comes up, they can visit the consultation desk next door anytime. The refugee thanks her. But moments later, someone spots Lord Takil entering the office. A staff member compliments Claire on her good work today. Claire turns and sees the young lord, calling out his name. A large shadowed figure also greets Lord Takil. Claire stammers her thanks, clearly flustered by the lord's presence. The refugee women hired at the reception office surround Takil, pouring out their gratitude, telling him he didn't just save them as refugees, but actually gave them real wages too. One woman says she truly doesn't know how to thank him enough. Then someone asks Takil what he just said, noticing he seems totally distracted. Takil looks around confused, asking where something is. But the situation escalates fast as people realize word has spread about a prodigy of the Solis family being involved. Takil's internally panicking, thinking this is a seriously troubling turn of events. Suddenly, a staff member calls out to Takil and Anne, straight up scolding them. Anne reminds Takil that he was told not to do something here, instructing him to repay through his work instead. Takil quickly apologizes. Anne apologizes as well, acknowledging that word got out about Takil's status and that he was the originator of the relief plan. Takil internally regrets overdoing things, while Anne just laughs it off awkwardly. Later, as they walk through the camp, someone asks if everything's going smoothly at the reception office. A staff member confirms that refugees are quickly learning their jobs, and the number they can handle per day is increasing, including the people hired from among the refugees themselves. Meanwhile, Claire speaks earnestly about how everyone here is truly grateful to the Lord and to Sir Takil. She explains that the Solis family not only shared warm, delicious meals with the refugees, but even helped them find work. The scene shows a happy refugee mother with her child. Claire continues, mentioning that she was raised in an orphanage yet was entrusted with such an important job. Takil calls out to Claire. She suddenly realizes she's gotten carried away and apologizes, saying she'll get back to work. Then Anne stands at an elevated position looking down at the registration area, telling Claire she's looking forward to working with her as always. Claire responds enthusiastically with confirmation. The reception office is launching everything all at once since its operations are wide-ranging and require complex processing, though the functions are indispensable for the coming calamity. Someone mentions they should lend them a hand too, and another person agrees. As the line of refugees grows longer, someone tells people to follow along since they're moving. Securing personnel is part of the goal as well. The registration tags being used were originally designed by Carl from the workshop for a different purpose. Takil realizes that seeing how capable Claire is at her job, he's recommended her as a potential future manager. The wooden registration tag shows careful craftsmanship, bearing the Solis family name. Takil reflects on how there's been one big change around him recently. Anne, who used to be his chaperone, has become one of the people who understands him best, right alongside Raymond. Instead of scolding him sometimes, she now looks at him with respect, even though he's 10 years younger. Takil finds himself wishing she would stop being quite so deferential, thinking to himself that the Ice Woman was no more. Anne has become a dependable ally and a great supporter to Takil. But a few days later, even though the refugee relief measures seem to be going smoothly, a troubling issue arises. A formal notice arrives from the Gorman Viscount family stating that all refugees from their Viscount territory are to be sent back there. Until now, most of the refugees had come from distant places like Viscount Gorman's or Viscount Hieronymus domains. and the Solis family provided aid equally without regard to their origins. However, because of the directive, they can no longer treat them as they had before. The people of Viscount Gorman's domain are to receive only soup kitchens and refugee camp guidance, with no job referrals. This is the utmost the Solis family can do under the circumstances. Since they have no way of verifying things at the camp, they process everything based on self-reporting, knowingly so. When many refugees registering learn of the situation through rumors, none of them admit to being from Viscount Gorman's lands anymore. A few days later, in front of the registration office, staff members announce there's plenty of food for everyone and ask people to line up and complete their registration. Takil admits he's been quietly spreading that rumor among the refugees himself, hoping things go smoothly this way. He calls out to the crowd, telling those from outside the Esther domain not to hesitate to join the line. When registering, they'll just ask for names and which town or village people came from. Someone responds affirmatively, and another person says excuse me as they approach. Then a group of mercenaries approaches the registration area, led by a blonde man and including a young kid among them with a hooded figure standing with them. One of the mercenaries explains they were hired by Viscount Gorman as mercenaries, but asks if they can still receive the food distribution. Takil thinks to himself that they're being a bit too honest about their situation. He asks them directly if they're all mercenaries hired by Viscount Gorman, trying to figure out how to guide them properly. The hooded figure explains they were kicked out by Viscount Gorman, told they weren't needed as another useless freeloader. The contract got terminated because of the recent incident. Takil tells them it won't be a problem then. He says they must have had quite a rough journey getting here, and if they register at the reception desk, they can receive food right away. He directs them to line up and register one by one. The hooded figure thanks Takil, saying they owe him one. A few hours later, Takil's cleaning up used dishes after helping out at the distribution when someone approaches and recognizes him as the one from before. The dark-haired man says he heard at the reception that Takil's the son of the lord of this domain, and that Takil personally devised the relief program. The man confirms it must be true after all. Takil protests that he's always getting scolded for not acting like a proper noble, and admits he doesn't look the part. The dark-haired man apologizes sincerely for his rude behavior earlier, saying he was told the relief system was Takil's own idea and he's deeply impressed. The dark-haired man introduces himself as Weiss Schwarzfolk. Takil responds that it's nice to meet him and introduces himself as Takil, second son of Baron Solis. Weiss explains that on behalf of the 30 members of his mercenary company, he offers his thanks. Though still young, he's been entrusted with the position of captain of the two-headed hawk mercenaries. Takil says they all help each other in times of need. But internally, he reacts to the name Weiss Schwarzfolk with recognition. Weiss explains that embarrassingly enough, in the Gorman Viscounty, there was even a public notice forbidding any aid to outsiders. So he couldn't get food in any town or village and barely managed to make it here. Takil thinks to himself that the name Weiss the Black Hawk sounds familiar somehow. He says he sees, so Weiss is seeking a new employer in the Griffonia Empire. Weiss confirms he was on a journey to find a new employer, passing through the Esther territory and heading toward the Griffonia Empire across the border. Then Takil has a shocked realization. Suddenly Takil remembers something crucial and his face goes pale with shock. The realization hits him like a freight train. His memories come flooding back. This mercenary captain standing before him is Weiss, the Black Hawk of the Griffonia Empire, the same man who will become commander of the Northern Expedition Army, the ever-victorious general. 12 years from now, he'll invade the kingdom of Kyle and occupy the Esther domain. Meanwhile, Weiss notices Takil's strange behavior and asks if he's overexerting himself. The dark-haired person with them quickly dismisses the concern, thanking Weiss for the plate. But Takil can't stop thinking this is the same man who executed him in the previous timeline. Takil tries to compose himself, saying he'd like to offer his thanks once again. In his mind, though, he's frantically remembering the execution scene. He was so distracted by someone's beard that he barely noticed who was actually there. When he went to deliver the surrender message, his consciousness was already fading, and the memory of that bearded man is already starting to blur. Then Weiss tells Takil that if there's anything they can do to repay him, he shouldn't hesitate to ask. Takil's internal panic reaches a breaking point. He desperately wants to scream at Weiss not to go to the Griffonia Empire, that he'll tell him everything. But instead, Takil declares this is an emergency. They need to come up with a plan right now. Weiss looks up at him, probably confused by the young lord's sudden intensity. Later on, Raymond apologizes for taking up Takil's time on such short notice. Takil says he doesn't mind at all. As the two of them walk through the hallway, Takil admits he'd like to propose something to his parents right away, but he's having trouble organizing his thoughts. He calls out to Raymond, asking him to please lend his help. Raymond responds with a quick agreement, no hesitation whatsoever. Takiel thanks him profusely, noting internally how insanely fast Raymond accepted. In a nearby room, someone tells Takiel his drink is ready. Raymond excuses himself and starts preparing tea. As he sets down the cup, Raymond calmly reminds Takiel that they say haste makes waste. Raymond tells Takiel to calm down as the young lord takes a sip of his tea. Takiel sits in the chair trying to compose himself, while Raymond stands nearby and asks him to please explain the overview first. Takiel responds that there are two things he'd like to propose. Takiel explains that the first matter concerns the future of the refugees. It'll be difficult to keep supporting this many people in their current state, but the refugees turn to the Solis family for help. He thought they could take them in as new subjects and turn this whole situation into an opportunity to boost the domain's productivity. Raymond asks what Takiel's thoughts are on this point. From his position in the room, Raymond mentions that the administration actually holds a similar view. Then he asks how Takiel intends to take them in. Takiel suggests Mount Taegun. They could recruit volunteers and proceed with settlement there as a new frontier. A view of the frontier shows tents scattered across the landscape. Takiel explains that in the future he'd like to make it a base for exploring the demon frontier. It's dangerous, sure, but also a source of great treasure. He shows Raymond a map marking the boundary between the Viscounty of Hiyorimi and the domain of Estel, pointing out the demon frontier. If they're looking for a remote location not easily noticed from either of the two territories, Taegun would be ideal. Also, in the frontier, there's no end to worries about bandits or monsters, but Taegun has strong defenses, so it's pretty reassuring. Raymond considers this and says he sees. Then perhaps he should hear Takiel's second proposal first. Takiel announces that the second proposal is this. Raymond asks if Takiel's aware that Vice Captain Weiss's mercenary company, the Twin-Headed Hawks, are temporarily staying in Est. Takiel confirms he's heard as much. Then Takiel mentions he's interacted with them several times. Their captain is exceptionally capable and the members are all elite soldiers. The Solis family is, after all, tasked with defending the border, so maintaining and strengthening their forces is their constant duty. Normally, even if someone invites a mercenary group of that caliber, they rarely accept. Takiel believes they shouldn't miss this perfect opportunity now that they're staying within their domain. Raymond considers this. Meanwhile, Takiel adds that fortunately, their investment in grain has left them with sufficient funds, and the first proposal for frontier development will require escorts as a guarantee of safety. Takiel proposes that as part of strengthening their forces, it would be a shame to pass up this chance to kill two birds with one stone by assigning them as guards for the new settlement. He finishes his tea and wraps up by saying that's his proposal for these 2 points. Then Takiel asks Raymond what he thinks. Raymond points out that hiring 30 people will cost quite a bit. Takiel realizes Raymond has seen right through him. Raymond asks if that's all Takiel has to say. But then Raymond notes that Anne has already reported to him about Takiel's plans. Takiel explains that he already has some ideas about covering the cost. He proposes allowing the mercenary company to take on regular jobs commissioned by other clients besides the Baron's house, which would let them balance the budget themselves with separate income. Takiel continues that he also wants Vice Captain Weiss to be his personal instructor so he can study swordsmanship and tactics under him. He points out that Weiss is trustworthy as a person, skilled in both swordsmanship and military strategy, and well-liked by his men. Raymond considers this and says the basic aspects should be fine for now. He mentions that as part of the administration's policy, it may be possible to discuss it with Lord Dalek and Lord Chris. Takiel looks worried, as Raymond adds that the matter of getting a teacher might be considered premature. Raymond explains that the process will likely start with determining whether Weiss can be trusted first, and there's a high chance the parents will say it's too early. Takiel groans in frustration at the restriction. Then Raymond asks what Takiel's thoughts are on the future of the settlement at Mount Taegun. Takiel lays out his vision clearly. He reminds Raymond that he's the second son supporting his elder brother, the family head. The settlement he's planning will boost the economy and serve as a base to protect the southern region of Esther. He's planning to reshape and govern the land of Taegun, and for the sake of the future, this place is absolutely non-negotiable, the most important location for his plans. Raymond tells Takiel he understands and to leave the rest to him. The next day in the regular meeting room, Takiel's father sits across from him with this amused expression on his face. He mentions that Raymond filled him in on everything, then comments that Takiel never stops causing new trouble. The father asks if Takiel's still fine with his proposal, pointing out that depending on how big this frontier development gets, there's no way the barony can pay even 10% of the promised profits. He adds that fortunately the barony has some financial leeway, but asks if Takiel actually understands that the investment amount will be incomparable to what came before. The father tries to caution that provoking the Viscounts any further might not be wise. But Takiel's mother immediately cuts in, defending her son. She points out that without Takiel's ideas, their domain would have suffered the same fate as the neighboring counties, and the very gains they've made came from his proposals. She sharply tells her husband that dealing with the Viscounts is a matter of his governance, and Takiel has nothing to do with it. The father tries to respond but just trails off. Turns out the mother's the strongest one in the family, and all those difficulties with both Viscounts, handling the refugees and securing resources from the frontier, were things the father had been stressing over anyway. Then the father gives his decision. The request for a swordsmanship instructor gets rejected for now. As for governing the new frontier territory, that matter will be put on hold until Takiel turns 15. He tells Takiel he'll leave the details to Raymond so the two of them can work it out together. Takiel acknowledges with understanding, though internally he's pretty disappointed about not getting the instructor approved yet. But the father adds one more thing. As part of the reward for Takiel's previous proposals, he'll be granted 50 gold coins. The father reminds him that this is an amount equal to several years of income for an ordinary commoner and tells him to use it wisely. Takiel just stares at the gold coins spinning before him. 50 gold coins. Even for a noble family, this is an outrageous amount of money for an 8-year-old baron's son to freely use. His mind races as he thinks about where those funds will go next. His mother considers the situation silently, looks like they'll just have to be satisfied with this for now. Meanwhile, someone mentions that while the swordsmanship instructor situation is pretty unfortunate, since Raymond's handling it, keeping the mercenary band around shouldn't be a problem. Then Takiel excuses himself from the room. But Dalek calls out. Kalijah looks on uncertainly as Chris turns around in surprise, calling to his brother. Takiel stops and looks back. He apologizes for interrupting so suddenly without any prior consultation. Then Kalijah steps forward, saying this matter concerns her as well, and asks to be allowed to speak. The father senses something brewing and tells Takiel to explain what this is about, adds that he's got a bad feeling about this. In the hallway, Takiel stands there with Chris and Dalek visible behind him, and he makes his declaration pretty clearly. He wants to formally become a student under a swordsmanship master. Then Takiel's expression shifts to one of shock at what comes next. Suddenly, Takiel raises his voice with passion, explaining that he and his brother wish to study under the leadership of Commander Weiss. He bows down and asks for permission to be granted. Meanwhile, Chris looks absolutely stunned at the reinforcements joining his cause, and Dalek appears equally caught off guard by the unexpected development. But then the father questions them from the background. They want to study under the leader of that mercenary band, just the two of them. Chris stands firm with determination written all over his face, while Dalek's eye shows nothing but serious resolve. In a smaller panel, a younger sibling asks Dalek what's gotten into him all of a sudden as Kalijah watches with growing concern. Then the father tells them to continue, addressing Dalek directly and telling him to go on with his explanation. But Chris takes over, diving into the structure of swordsmanship. As everyone knows, swordsmanship is generally divided into 9 ranks, and people have a vague sense of which rank they belong to. He uses a pyramid diagram to illustrate the whole thing, showing the hierarchy from Sword God at the very top, then down through Sword Saint, Sword Demon, Sword Master, Sword Expert, Veteran, Swordsman, in training, and finally unaware at the bottom. He continues his explanation with another diagram, breaking down the reality of their situation. Within the Esther domain, there's no one with skill surpassing a certain level. The Solis barony has plenty of veterans at the squad leader level, sure. But as for sword masters, there are only 2 in the entire domain who are of commander class, and that's excluding their father. Chris continues laying out his argument with cold facts. The army of Baron Solis is known for its valor, but in truth, few among them actually excel in swordsmanship. He turns to his father and asks if that assessment is correct. The father confirms it, so Chris presses on with his research. And here's the thing, the other 2 sword masters in the domain have been granted knighthood and now govern towns, which means it'd be pretty difficult to study under them. Kalijah's eyes widen in shock at her brother's thoroughness. She asks if Chris investigated all of that on his own. Chris continues his presentation about Dalek. His brother's currently 11 years old and way more mature than anyone else his age. Despite being just a kid, Dalek's skill is already on par with grown adults. Though he only recently began serious sword training, he's already reached the 3rd lowest rank of swordsman. Chris explains that Dalek's growth doesn't stop there either. His bloodline magic manifested recently rare light magic even within the kingdom. He adds that in the previous timeline, by the time Dalek turned 16, the guy had reached the rank of Sword Saint, and there were only a handful of those in the entire kingdom. Even in this timeline though, Dalek's already starting to show signs of that same potential. But then Takiel realizes something pretty troubling as he's listening to all this. Dalek's growing about 3 years faster than he did in the previous timeline. Chris acknowledges his father's concern with a nod. The father offers up a suggestion. If Chris isn't satisfied with his current training, he can arrange for someone to help out. Takiel adds that he'll have Raymond set up a training partner. Then the father mentions that if it's a master they're looking for, he can think of someone who'd work. But Takiel's internal voice cuts through with dark clarity. That approach is way too naive. Suddenly, Chris drops the bombshell that changes everything. Sir Weiss's swordsmanship is at the level of a sword demon. All three siblings react with complete shock. Chris drives the point home. Weiss is one rank above their father. The room settles after the revelation, and Takiel processes what his brother just said. Then he acknowledges the point Chris made, telling them he'll let them know the result of the review later, so they should wait until then. Chris and Klaja's faces light up with excitement at the response. Meanwhile, the father orders an investigation into Weiss and his mercenary band, and the proposal meeting comes to an end. Once they had gathered enough reliable information, permission was granted for Chris and Takiel to receive swordsmanship training from Weiss, assuming he agreed, of course. Meanwhile, Takiel reflects on what just happened, realizing that this time he was saved by his brother's unexpected support. But then something else crosses his mind. What was behind Dalek's rapid growth in the end? Turns out this is something Dalek told Takiel later, after he had gained confidence. Dalek worked desperately so he wouldn't lose his place because his little brother was too talented. Suddenly, Dalek has a moment of realization, so that strange behavior back then was because of that. Then Chris apologizes to his brother, saying he seems to have messed up again, but Dalek tells him it's fine. At the temporary mercenary training grounds on the outskirts of S-City, Weiss wraps up the day's session. Dalek thanks him for the instruction. The text identifies him as Solis von Dalek, 11 years old. Nearly 3 months have passed since the brothers began training under Weiss. Klaja thanks Weiss warmly as the session ends, but Chris looks completely exhausted, wondering where his brother gets all that energy from. Someone tells him he's being too slack. The narration identifies him as Solis von Taghil, 8 years old. Then Chris asks Dalek if he's already reached the rank of master. Dalek explains that Weiss's training is incredibly strict, truly like a demon instructor, but he's earnestly absorbed it and is beginning to bloom with talent. He describes his training schedule. He trains with the sword 3 times a week at the temporary drill grounds and twice more in the courtyard of Baron Solis' manor. Their father was wide-eyed at how much Dalek has grown. At his level, even regular soldiers wouldn't stand a chance against him. The fact that Dalek has already surpassed the swordsman rank to reach even the warrior rank is pretty remarkable. Chris cheerfully tells his brother it's because he has such a great teacher. Meanwhile, Takiel reflects on his own situation. The kid hasn't even graduated from being a mere trainee. When it comes to a level 2 soldier rank, he could be proud of his swordsmanship compared to other 8-year-olds. But in reality, even compared to them, his skill is pathetically hopeless. He sits there dejected, thinking he should be studying under the same great teacher as his brother. The scene shows him looking downcast among the flowers. The swordsmanship training and the formation of the pioneer group have both been proceeding almost exactly as planned. Takiel explains the development strategy. Even if the settlement starts small, the plan is to make it fully functional as a town. First, they'll build inns and shops to serve as a rear base for the hunters who go in and out of the demon lands. Meanwhile, investigators, including refugees employed for the task, have been dispatched to the Taegun frontier. Takiel reflects that he's really glad he consulted with Raymond beforehand. The reason everything has been going so smoothly is thanks to Raymond, who's been directing the whole effort. The mercenary bands are also rotating into the settlement, working with the vanguard on preparations and town development. In half a year, they'll send in the construction corps, and the following year they plan to kick off full-scale colonization. As for Weiss, he's been entrusted with duties in the frontier settlement, mainly assigned to his lieutenant. While traveling back and forth between Est and the frontier, he also trains the brothers. After that, it seems both parties agreed to renew the contract yearly, provided both sides consent. The contract between the Baron Solis family and the Mercenary Corps will be for 2 years for the first term, then renewable for 1 year at a time after that. Meanwhile, someone calls out to Takiel and he responds. The voice tells him he's rested enough and suggests they do a little sparring. Takiel gives an affirmative response. Then during a training break, someone tells Takiel that at this rate he'll be stuck in training forever. Takiel responds that he's just gonna get brushed off anyway. But Weiss tells him to take a little more break and that he's got this. The encirclement of Weiss went off without a hitch, and there's no need to say Takiel let out a big sigh of relief. Now he can finally focus on countermeasures for the remaining 5 great calamities of the first term. Meanwhile, Anne announces to Takiel that a package has arrived from the workshop. Takiel asks her to carry it to his room, and Anne confirms she understood. The package is finally here. the long-awaited item from Carl's workshop in the town of Est. Takiel thinks he can now finally release the fifth arrow. Takiel explains that to break through the upcoming challenge, he's been developing something since he was 5 years old. In the battle at the border next year, when the protagonist turns 9, Baron Solis' army will suffer heavy losses, and its power will be greatly diminished. This will mark the fourth event among the 5 great disasters of the previous era. The panel shows a completed bow and quiver of arrows. But this isn't just any ordinary bow either. Takiel designed a bow that fulfills 3 specific conditions: long range that can attack from outside the enemy's reach, power sufficient to pierce the armor of the Empire's iron cavalry, and usability by all soldiers without requiring advanced skill. He began by improving the bow materials available in this world with the help of Carl, a craftsman at the workshop. First, he made a composite bow by laminating multiple kinds of wood together. Then, to further increase range and power, he added metals and monster materials, creating a synthetic bow through further refinement. Someone compliments Gerudo-san, saying he's amazing as always. But then the craftsman explains to Takiel that this thing's not something an ordinary person can handle. The problem is that the bow required tremendous strength to draw, making it far from something all soldiers could actually use. And that's where Takiel's cheat knowledge from the modern world comes in. Taking inspiration from something called a compound bow, invented in America back in the 20th century, he combines 4 pulleys together to reduce strain while cranking up the initial velocity. In short, the guy developed a crossbow that blends the traits of both a composite bow and a compound bow, and mounting it on a base makes it way easier to use while boosting accuracy. It's been 3 years since Takiel first started coming to the workshop. It's been a long road. After the workshop got swamped with water wheel orders, he started taking prototype models home for research. Meanwhile, recalling what Nishida had seen on some video site, Takiel kept testing the positions and attachments of the strings, the sizes and combinations of pulleys over and over again in solitude. The image shows his family together as Takiel thinks about wanting to protect his family and their land. With Carl's craftsmanship handling the final adjustments to the placement of materials and parts, Takiel invested all the gold coins his father had given him the other day to complete the project. And honestly, without the feelings driving him forward, he would have given up long ago. Then finally, the prototype arrived from the workshop fully completed. The finished crossbow weapon gets showcased in detail, displaying its mechanical components and mounted design, and Takiel stands there with the completed weapon, ready to test what he's spent years developing. Now Takiel had them make 2 kinds of crossbows. The high-end version was mounted with a powerful composite bow and equipped with pulleys, while the cheaper version was made to reduce costs by using a composite bow without pulleys. But here's the thing, after some research, it turns out crossbows also exist in this world. However, compared to regular bows, they had a higher rate of fire or mismatched use for their intended purpose, so they were rarely adopted as weapons. History's already proven the strengths and weaknesses of crossbows. During the European Hundred Years' War, the longbow completely dominated the crossbow. And over in Japan, the existence of traditional bows and firearms meant crossbows were never widely used and just disappeared from history. Bows are also used in the Kingdom of Kyle, but here's the thing, they require a high level of skill and constant training. For Baron Solis' army, which has tons of part-time soldiers bouncing between training and actual battle, their use is pretty limited. But with a crossbow, the user just needs to hold it steady while the string is drawn, then pull the trigger, that's it. Throughout the development process, Takiel made sure to maintain strict information confidentiality through Raymond. Raymond tells him to leave it to him, so everything's locked down. Now all preparations for the 5th arrow are finally complete. 2 days later at the Mercenary Corps temporary training ground, someone greets Takiel with a good morning. Weiss greets the young master as Takiel arrives carrying some luggage. One of the group members asks about the luggage. Meanwhile, Anne mentions that if it was luggage, she would have carried it for him. Then Weiss asks if he may have Takiel's opinion on something, but Takiel responds that he's actually got something he'd like them to take a look at today. Weiss examines the crossbow carefully as someone asks him about it. Weiss comments that it's an unusual-looking crossbow. Takiel confirms and explains he combined ideas from different books to make a model, then had a craftsman improve it. Weiss gives the weapon a skeptical look, and Takiel notes that judging by that expression, Weiss must also know the pros and cons of crossbows. Hardly anyone in the Kingdom of Kyle knows about these weapons, yet Weiss does, as expected of the vice captain. Takiel asks if Weiss could try firing it for him. He wants to hear Weiss's thoughts on the weapon before making any decisions. Weiss takes the crossbow and prepares to test it, and across the training ground, a target sits in the distance. He positions himself and readies the weapon. Then Weiss fires the crossbow. The bolt launches with tremendous force, flying straight toward the target. Takiel and the others watch closely, tracking the shot. Suddenly, the bolt slams into the target with a serious impact, and the observers react to the power of the shot, clearly impressed by what they just witnessed. Weiss takes a moment, then reloads the crossbow with practiced efficiency. His movements are quick and deliberate as he tests the weapon's mechanics. The guy looks up with clear enthusiasm. If Takiel's got another one of these, Weiss wants it. The mercenary corps would definitely want to equip these weapons too. But Takiel apologizes, explaining that unfortunately this is all they have completed so far. He wanted to hear Weiss's impressions before making a proposal to his father. Weiss admits the power of the weapon absolutely astonished him. He tells Takiel to let his father know he'd like to buy one himself with this weapon. Even the armor of the Iron Cavalry, the pride of the Griffonia Empire, can be pierced. Suddenly, someone calls out to Takiel in the background. Klyja protests that it's not fair and she wants to shoot too. Meanwhile, Chris begs to be allowed a turn as well. Someone reluctantly agrees to let them go ahead, and the sibling accepts enthusiastically before grabbing the crossbow. Then Dalek just keeps shooting without getting bored, practicing with the weapon over and over again. Dalek continues shooting, calling out that he wants just a little more practice, and someone tells him to go ahead. In the end, the shooting session doesn't stop until Anne finally says something to put an end to it. The next day rolls around, and in the Solis' barren household courtyard, Takiel gathers his father, mother, and Raymond together. He thanks them for giving him their time. Then Takiel addresses Dalek formally, holding the crossbow as he prepares for a demonstration. Meanwhile, Episode 8 begins in the Baron Solis Manor courtyard, where Takiel stands ready with the crossbow, formally addressing his brother Dalek as he prepares to show them what the weapon can do. Takiel fires the crossbow, and the bolt launches with incredible force, slamming into the target with an explosive impact that makes Dalek and the others react in complete shock at the sheer power of this weapon. Takiel celebrates hitting dead center while the others just stand there, totally stunned by what they just witnessed. Meanwhile, Dalek stares at the strange weapon, his mind working through what he's seeing, such an unusual shape, yet such tremendous power. He can't help but wonder if this knowledge also came from Takiel's books. Takiel explains that yeah, the parts came from books, and he tried applying them to see if they could actually be used for a bow. Then he mentions that after conducting a test shot yesterday, and asking Weiss the vice captain for his opinion, the mercenary said it could even bring down the Iron Cavalry of the Griffonia Empire. But suddenly someone calls Takiel a fool. The dark-haired figure scolds him, telling him he should have reported such an important matter to his father first. Takiel looks dejected and admits he got scolded. Raymond tells him that's understandable. Then Takiel explains that with this crossbow, even the weak and inexperienced soldiers from their domain should be able to perform decently. Suddenly, someone calls out to Lord Takier. Baron Solis asks what they think about the crossbow, but then he points out that compared to bows, crossbows have the drawback of a slower rate of fire. The reason crossbows aren't valued much is because of that limitation. Taking that into account, they need to plan for the war coming in 1 year. Takiel and another figure present their proposal, suggesting they begin making their move. Present at the strategy meeting are Weiss, Takiel, and Klyja. Takiel proposes they should begin mass production of the new crossbow he developed and deploy it throughout the army immediately. Right now, the greatest threat facing them is the Empire's Iron Cavalry. At present, they've got no way to counter their group charges and they're being utterly overrun. Takiel explains that the archer's arrows can't pierce the cavalry's armor, but as they can see, this new weapon can actually penetrate even iron, and he can fire it himself. Their current fighting force numbers just under 400 soldiers, but if they can equip every single soldier with the crossbow, it could completely change the course of the war. Furthermore, they'll keep its mechanism secret as much as possible. For the time being, they can maintain their advantage. Weiss considers this and acknowledges its ideal. Then Takiel adds that they won't just mass-produce the new weapon, but will broaden the range of those who can use it. He asks what Weiss thinks would happen if 1/10 of their subjects could wield it. Here lies the true value of the sixth arrow. Takiel explains this isn't an exaggeration or some overly optimistic estimate. They'll gain nearly 800 new archers. First up as the initial stage, they're planning to build a shooting range and equip people with standard crossbows. The townspeople can enjoy target shooting as a form of entertainment, and Takiel will prepare prizes and make all the arrangements. The shooting range will be open not only for soldier training, but also free to the townspeople whenever they want. Meanwhile, someone asks Weiss and Klyja if they don't think Takier's proposal is pretty interesting, like, the villagers will hone their skills just for the rewards alone. Then Takiel explains enthusiastically that while they're playing around, their skill will improve naturally. And boom, they'll secure themselves some excellent archers without even trying. But Weiss questions whether the villagers will actually go along with it. Klyja just smiles at the proposal though. Klyja tells them she tried it for the first time yesterday too, and it was really fun. Plus, once they hear Takiel's next proposal, she thinks all their worries will be cleared up. Someone agrees with her assessment. Takil presents the sixth arrow of his plan, showing off a presentation board with his proposal for the first stage. They'll assign points to the targets, and high scorers will receive prizes. The prize system will motivate participation. Then Takil continues explaining his tournament structure. As the second stage, they'll organize monthly regular tournaments and a large-scale annual one to let participants compete in skill. Moving into the third stage, they'll offer appropriate prize money to the top winners of each event to encourage participation. Meanwhile, the stand-ins show Anne declaring she cannot afford to lose as Lord Takil's guard, while Dalek announces he's taking the annual championship. Now for the fourth stage, they'll hold a betting system on the yearly tournament champion. Those who guess correctly will receive payouts, and they'll act as the house, taking a small commission from the wagers to cover operational costs such as prizes and rewards. The stand-ins show Kreese betting on someone while Darren complains his prediction was off. Takil asks his father what he thinks. That way, the tournaments will become lively, and naturally the number of participants in both competitions and betting will increase. They'll create such a system and turn it into a festival where all the townsfolk can take part. Takil explains that in time, this tournament will become a hallmark of the Solis family. They can turn their citizens into a fighting force through entertainment and profit. Baron Solis says it's quite a good idea. Observing the meeting, Raymond notes the merchant baron's blood is boiling. Other domains will notice once it becomes a specialty, and then they'll set the minimum amount for entry fees. Meanwhile, Takil adds a note in response to Raymond's question about the crossbow's inferior rate of fire compared to the bow, saying he believes it all depends on how the thing's used. Takil then references the three-stage gun volley Oda Nobunaga used at the Battle of Nagashino. The number of arrows fired at once decreases, sure, but even so, it's far greater than using ordinary archers like they've been doing up to now. For example, if they switch every 2 shots, it's twice as fast, and 3 shifts would triple the firing speed, with soldiers moving back in rotation after shooting. If it's like this, they can actually counter the Iron Cavalry's charge, and someone reacts to this realization. The guy repeats that his swordsmanship is excellent, but with the bow he's hopeless. But another character counters that even an ordinary man, after just 1 day of practice, can shoot with enough power to pierce a target from that distance. Someone asks if it wouldn't be amazing if every soldier in the Baron's army could shoot like that. Then Takil mentions he hasn't told Ice about this, of course, and Raymond acknowledges this with understanding. Both of them share a knowing look about keeping this development secret from Klija for now. Meanwhile, Baron Solis tells Raymond he got him there, and Raymond agrees exactly. The girl looks uncomfortable thinking about the expenses, but suddenly a text box appears saying they should pretend they didn't hear that. Baron Solis calls out Raymond's name, and Raymond asks what's up. Takil points out that this is a new type of crossbow. He wants mass production requested from the workshop right away. He emphasizes the need to thoroughly safeguard secrecy while beginning immediate distribution to all soldiers, plus training them in its use. Baron Solis acknowledges with understanding. Then Baron Solis continues, adding that they should also keep construction going on the shooting range and aim to strengthen the entire population's combat ability using crossbows without pulleys. In the split panels below, Baron Solis tells Klija to be absolutely careful that no information leaks out. And as for how to deploy each weapon on the battlefield, he's leaving that research entirely to Dalek. Takil adds that he'll also entrust Klija with personnel recruitment for the reception office and management of the tournament. He tells someone to finalize the details regarding the operation of the shooting range and the voting system, then submit them. They respond affirmatively. Baron Solis announces these expenses will be covered by the government budget, then concludes that's all. In a chibi illustration, the two siblings celebrate their success together, declaring they did it. Moving on, Takil speaks up with a little proposal mentions that Weiss said he wanted a new model crossbow, and Baron Solis responds with some clear interest. Then Takil lays out his idea. For example, they could offset part of the contract fee in exchange for providing crossbows to mercenary groups, and along with strict management and confidentiality, they'd have the weapons tested in real combat against monsters while asking for reports on any improvement. He continues, explaining that if they agree to these terms, they can deploy the early mass-produced models to the mercenary corps and later send those familiar with their use as instructors to the army. Raymond acknowledges it's an excellent idea. Meanwhile, one sibling teases another about getting even the master to make full use of them, says they've gotten pretty cunning, but the other responds that they've been pitch black from the start. Then Takil asks his father if they should conduct a test firing too, and Baron Solis agrees. Suddenly Klija wonders if she can do it too. Klija explains that if they start moving now, they'll definitely make it in time for next year's war. Mentions that until now, they've been utterly crushed by mass cavalry charges. She adds that this way they can increase the number of soldiers they can mobilize for war. And if they can turn their commoners into a fighting force, they can entrust the home front to them without worry. Someone praises Baron Solis as expected. A text box drops some knowledge. Empowering the commoners militarily has always been a challenge. The problem is pretty straightforward. If they march off to war without leaving enough soldiers behind as a garrison, their defenses end up weak as hell. Bandits roaming the frontiers and monsters could attack at any moment, making it far from safe. Meanwhile, at the test firing range, someone calls out that they hit the target and yells over to Raymond that he nailed it too. Another voice tells someone it's their turn next. Someone advises raising the angle just a little more and another person agrees. Then someone observes that this is quite something. Tachyon notes this is it. If anyone says something later, they can just point to this as proof. He adds that it looks like the entertainment side of things will be fine. The narration explains that in the not-so-distant future, as the Solis archers, this would become the first step toward making their name echo across the battlefield. The narration states they'll name it the Esther Bow. From this point on, they'll be using this newly developed weapon in their world. Later at the East Town workshop, craftsmen are busy at work when someone yells that a part's crooked. Another voice chimes in, saying they'll leave the extra materials to them. Then a figure arrives at the workshop entrance, greeting them. Tachyon, Anne, and another companion arrive at Geld's workshop in Est, and Tachyon notices the building has gotten way bigger. Plus, there seem to be more people working there now. Geld greets them warmly, calling out to the young master and thanking them for coming all this way. Inside the workshop, the workers notice their arrival and someone announces that the young master has come. As they walk up the stairs, Tachyon tells Geld not to trouble himself since they're the ones showing up unannounced. But Geld brushes off the concern, asking what brings them there today. Tachyon explains they came to observe the production status of the Esther Bow and to consult on a new development item, and Geld's eyes light up with intense interest. Tachyon tries to tell Geld to put his work first, but Geld interrupts enthusiastically, saying both the water wheel project and everything else they're working on are all thanks to the young master's ideas. He credits Tachyon for giving them all this work, and someone even mentions Gerudo's name. Tachyon and Anne exchange pleasant looks at Geld's gratitude. They head to the workshop's private room, and Tachyon comments that before it was just a single room, but now he can discuss things in peace and he's grateful for the upgrade. Geld asks what kind of product Tachyon is developing. They settle in with Carl joining them, and Tachyon begins to explain. Tachyon presents blueprints for a new weapon design, and Geld looks at the plans with curiosity. Tachyon explains it's a type of crossbow capable of rapid fire, but adds there's no rush on this project. He tells Geld to prioritize development of the regular crossbow and the Estel bow first, and Geld acknowledges the instructions. Then Tachyon goes into detail about the mechanism, explaining that several arrows are set in a magazine, and pulling the lever moves the mechanism back and forth to load arrows. At the same time, it draws the string, so once the lever is fully pulled, it fires automatically. The design is actually for the Zhuge crossbow, supposedly invented by the genius tactician Zhuge Kongaming. There's historical debate about whether it actually existed or was a later creation. The weapon appeared in Romance of the Three Kingdoms, and Nishida used to get excited watching movies and making videos about it in his previous life. Tachyon assesses that while it's not quite a machine gun, it's a weapon with greater rapid-fire capability than a regular bow, and there's no harm in studying it. His excitement builds at the thought of actually getting his hands on one in this world. He discusses the metal fitting that hooks the string with Geld, asking about the shape details. Back at the workshop table, Geld warns Tachyon that making the shaft wobble when it fires would be stupid. Tachyon suggests they make the part double-layered and curved instead, and Geld calls out to bring the tools and arrows. But suddenly, Tachyon stops him, calling out to wait. Tachyon stresses that delivering the weapons they ordered is top priority, and that developing the repeating crossbow can wait. He urgently adds that they need to keep this whole thing top secret. Carl smiles confidently and tells Tachyon to leave it to him. Geld enthusiastically raises his hand in agreement. Meanwhile, Tachyon watches them silently from behind. After that, Tachyon and his brother head over to check out the Estoril bow production site together. Some parts have been ordered from blacksmiths and swapped out with metal, while the wooden components are split up among different craftsmen for better durability and mass production. Tachyon's thinking they need to somehow be ready for the war that's gonna break out at the border next year. And honestly, it looks like they'll make it in time with the minimum number of Estoril bows they need. Meanwhile, Weiss himself actually met with Tachyon's father after the presentation and made his request, so the mercenary group ended up getting all the equipment they needed. Sometime later, the first batch of Estoril bows gets completed and delivered, and that day, Tachyon finally heads home feeling relieved. But there's more going on. Under Tachyon's father's request, research on the triple volley technique is also being conducted, and the time limit is next autumn. The war that's coming next year is gonna be a local conflict led by the frontier lords. Its scale won't be huge by any means. Even so, Baron Solis' army is set to lose as much as 40% of its troops. However, this time there's a major difference from the previous history. In the mercenary corps, they're not only handling the use and feedback of the Esther bow, but they're also actually training with it. Three things give Takil an advantage here. First, the existence of the mercenary company Twin-Headed Hawk led by Vice, known as the ever-victorious general from 3 battles ago. Second, the deployment of Esther bows capable of piercing even the enemy's elite iron cavalry. And third, from the baronial chronicles, Takil already knows in advance exactly how the kingdom of Kyle's army will collapse. Takil keeps worrying about all of this every single day until one day, Baron Solis tells him that since he can't fully trust Viscount Gorman's army as allies, he needs one more move just to eliminate even a bit of that uncertainty. Takil starts wondering whether it's even pointless to keep worrying at this point. Outside, Dalek asks his brother what's wrong. Takil tells him about his magic. Dalek confirms it's light magic, which is rare even in the kingdom of Kyle. Takil agrees but seems troubled. Then he becomes distressed and asks Dalek to please just let him vent a little. Dalek asks if it's really true. Takil tells him if it weren't true, he wouldn't be this depressed. But Dalek gets excited and declares it's possible. Takil hesitates though, thinking they should consult their father first or he'll scold them again. Then Takil grins confidently and declares that it's really just a trap for first-timers, but with this they can beat the Empire's iron cavalry. Meanwhile, in the autumn of Kyle year 502, an express rider arrives at Est. The time for the sortie is about to be announced. The historical record titled History of the Baron Solis Domain. Omens of Ruin details what happened in Kyle era year 502. Margrave Goth of the Graphonia Empire invades the kingdom of Kyle. Marquis Hasteberg leads the surrounding noble armies to intercept them at the border. But Viscount Hieronymus' forces crumble significantly, putting the right flank in danger of collapse. Baron Solis' army, isolated and losing 40% of its men, fights desperately to prevent the line from breaking. Though the Imperial army slays tons of soldiers and their morale is high, the invasion gets thwarted. The kingdom's army loses just as many soldiers, but somehow they manage to repel the invasion. Meanwhile, the people of Esther are lamenting hard over everything that went down. Then one day at the end of a still scorching summer, a messenger on a fast horse from the Marquis of Hasteberg arrives in Est and delivers the news to Takil. There are signs that the Graphonia Empire is preparing for another invasion. The orders from Hasteberg command them to lead their troops to Southern Gate Fortress with all possible speed and annihilate the enemy on the Southern Gate Plains along the border south of the fortress. At last, the time they knew would come has finally arrived. Baron Solis summons 215 standing soldiers and 335 part-time troops from across the domain for a total of 550 men. He leaves part of them as a garrison and leads 400 into battle. The double-headed Hawk mercenary band contributes 40 men, while Baron Solis' army fields 360 men. Though it falls short of the 600 required of a higher-ranked Viscount, this number is still twice that assigned to an ordinary baron's 200-man force. It's still a force sufficient to maintain his honor. The map shows their route from Estel Domain through the Viscounty of Hieronymus to the Southern Gate Fortress near the Margraviate of Hasteberg and the Demon Frontier. And with that planned out, they set out on the road to the Southern Gate Plains. Meanwhile, Takil watches the departing army from the city of Est with the remaining members of his family. Klyja stands in the streets of Est, the wind blowing through her long blonde hair. Below, Takil sits during a break from self-practice, thinking that his father and the others should be arriving at the battlefield around now. Takil had actually volunteered to go to war but got immediately rejected. Solis von Takil, age 9. Klyja told him the battlefield isn't a playground for children, and someone else warned him the battlefield isn't as gentle a place as he thinks. But this time is different. The Solis Baron's army has something that didn't exist in the previous history, and Takil can't get that out of his head. If events go according to history, the Solis Baron's army will lose 40% of its strength in this war. He knows how harsh this battle will be. It's exactly because he knows that he's wished so strongly for it. Takil reflects on his preparations. He's already discussed potential concerns and strategies against Iron Cavalry. With Vice's strategy and the elite troops he commands, even disadvantages can be overcome. Vice is the tactical genius known as the ever-victorious general, and his presence alone shifts the odds. The Esther bow is a long-range weapon capable of piercing iron cavalry armor. Compared to previous campaigns, the cavalry strength has increased dramatically. In Baron Solis' army, specialized archers have been abolished instead. Every soldier, including cavalry, carries an Esther bow. Since crossbows don't require much training, even part-time soldiers can make full use of the advantages of ranged weapons. During the grain price surge 2 years ago, Takil's father shrewdly made preparations in advance regarding the increase in cavalry forces. Baron Solis's father was incredibly thorough. He always attached a convincing pretext to his actions so no one would find it suspicious. Given the settlement's location, they needed to deploy horses in preparation for a full-scale evacuation of all citizens. They were crucial for heavy traffic between the settlements. The horses were essential infrastructure. Meanwhile, Takil's father took advantage of the famine crisis to amass a large number of warhorses. In other territories suffering from famine, people often slaughtered horses for food or sold their warhorses in exchange for grain. Baron Solis focused chiefly on acquiring warhorses through these transactions. As a result, the double-headed Hawk Mercenary Company got supplied with warhorses as payment in kind, and every single member became a cavalryman. The cavalry unit that once had fewer than 100 riders now easily exceeds 200, with the mercenary company included. Meanwhile, back in Est, Clyja practices her swordwork. She knows the situation but finds it still frustrating. Nearby, Takil sits against a pillar, and as a child, all he can do now is wait here for good news. He's done everything he can. Takil silently prays for the fourth calamity to pass, pleading for his family and soldiers to be safe. Then Anne stands with a determined expression. Looking up, she quietly voices her hope that they may be able to overcome it. The scene shifts to a wide view of the sky, where Clyja stands watching birds fly overhead, the wind blowing through her hair as she looks toward the distant battlefield. The scene shifts to the border region at the Southern Gate Plains, where vast plains stretch out with military formations visible across the landscape, multiple encampments dotting the territory. Meanwhile, Lord Darren stands in his armor overlooking the battlefield. This is the Kyle Kingdom Army's far-right wing, consisting of the Solis Cornell baronial allied forces. Suddenly, a cloaked figure approaches Dalek from behind and tells him good work. Dalek reports that the construction of fortifications, trenches, and traps by the Earth Mage has been completed. They borrowed the mage from Baron Cornell and the work is done. Then the two walk across the plains together. Dalek mentions he heard this invasion is split fallout from the Imperial succession dispute. The cloaked figure, likely Weiss, confirms that's correct but notes it's an utterly troublesome matter for them regardless. Dalek explains that the First Prince's faction made a rash move that so far hasn't achieved any notable results. That's why the First Prince himself didn't participate, only the Marquis of Gort came. Dalek then asks what Weiss thinks of their formation, and Weiss acknowledges the question seriously. Takil agrees as someone reports the enemy forces are roughly on par with theirs, about 7,000 strong. The speaker explains the enemy has formed a fish-scale formation to go on the offensive, and in response, their side intends to encircle and counter them with a crane-wing formation. A tactical diagram shows the Griffonian Empire's 12,000 troops arranged in an offensive fish-scale formation at the top, with their right wing, center, and left wing attack units each numbering 1,200. Meanwhile, below them, the Kingdom of Kyle's allied forces are spread in a crane-wing formation. Marquis Hasteberg's 3,000 troops anchor the center, with various baronial and viscounty forces on the wings, including Baron Solis's alliance with 600 troops. The blonde commander observes the basic policy is sound, but risky, then asks what that means. The blonde commander explains that Marquis Hasteberg is positioned in the center as they anticipated, but the enemy may not necessarily aim for his main camp. An image shows the mounted Marquis under his banner. The analysis continues. Their large wings lack coordination. Each commander has taken position on hills where defense is advantageous, but because of this their forces are spread out and both wings are widely extended. Takil concludes the enemy's likely objective is to defeat them piecemeal, and they'll probably strike at one of the wings. Two tactical diagrams illustrate the danger. Once the enemy crushes one of their wings, they could strike the main camp from the center's flank. Alternatively, they might break through, cut off the allied retreat, and even surround them instead. Takil pauses in thought. The explanation continues. Because their army has stretched itself into this vast encirclement formation, it's lacking in depth, easy to break through, and unable to coordinate with allies. Many of their soldiers would become isolated and unable to join the battle, and in a fight with no difference in troop numbers, this is fatal. Images show Viscount Gorman's army and Viscount Hierony's army. The analysis notes that as for their right wing, the situation is complicated. The two commanders exchange concerned looks. The other commander points out that in this state of mutual distrust, the issue of the free provision of turnips came right after the refugee matter. Then Takil notes they've been a target from the start. The blonde commander agrees, finding it pretty troublesome that the alliance has to watch their backs even with their own allies around. Meanwhile, a tactical diagram reveals the right wing formation. And here's the problem. If the enemy decides to go all in on the right wing, the Solis Cornell alliance positioned way out on the far right is gonna get isolated and torn apart. Takil points out that if those two viscounts try settling their old grudges during this battle, things could go south real fast. The blonde commander responds that if both armies fall back even slightly under enemy pressure, the whole formation's gonna be in serious danger. The blonde commander confirms the enemy's probably thinking the exact same thing, agreeing it's definitely risky as hell. Then a dramatic image shows the Griffonian heavy cavalry, these armored warriors decked out in horned helmets representing the Coat Iron Cavalry Corps. The narration explains this is the enemy's main force, and they've got absolute confidence in it. In reality, if the Allied forces were to take that charge head-on, they wouldn't last more than a few minutes. But then the blonde commander pauses and adds with a slight smile that this is only true if they take it head-on. Someone notes that this right here is the opening they need, a turning point that could completely change how this war plays out. The scene shifts to three commanders standing together on elevated ground, looking down at the massive battlefield stretching before them. The explanation continues that Baron Cornell's forces, who's basically a master at fortification tactics, are positioned with them. Baron Cornell gets identified among the group standing there. The briefing lays out the details. All 400 soldiers are equipped with Ester bows, and on top of that, they've newly formed 200 cavalry units. Tachyon stands among the commanders as these strategic assets get laid out one by one. The tactical briefing keeps going. Someone mentions there's one more element to consider, then reveals there's actually one last secret tactic up their sleeve. The explanation notes that leading their allied left wing is the valiant and well-known Viscount Kyrios. The speaker continues that if he coordinates his attack perfectly with theirs and they pull off a half encirclement from the left side, and here's the kicker, this is a strategy even their own allies won't see coming. With all these preparations in place, they should be able to put up a pretty damn good fight. An armored figure appears from behind as these plans get discussed in detail. Then Tachyon declares with this confident smirk that he's gonna turn the whole mood around. The dramatic statement just hangs there in the air for a second. Weiss looks completely confused by the bold declaration, while the blonde commander can't help but smile in response. Baron Solis comments that he heard Weiss received recommendations from his sons, noting that appointing the captain as their strategist was the right call. Then he pauses and adds that Tachyon in particular was so fierce, wondering what that intensity was all about. The Baron trails off as someone else is shown from behind. Meanwhile, the blonde commander reveals with a smile that he himself intended that from the very beginning. Weiss responds that it's an honor, looking surprised and impressed. The blonde commander then notes that the enemy will start moving soon, the battlefield landscape stretching out before them. Suddenly, the command rings out for all troops. The narration notes this is the battle that would later be called the Southern Gate Extermination Battle. A senior commander raises his arm dramatically, his cape flowing, and yells for everyone to prepare for combat. Weiss stands ready below as the narration confirms the battle has now begun. At the Griffonia Empire Army headquarters, Margrave Goat surveys the battlefield situation with satisfaction. He declares that those fools from the Kingdom of Kyle lined up exactly as expected. The Margrave remarks with contempt that they can't even understand why the Empire deliberately let them take the hill. Margrave Goat continues his analysis, noting that the Kyle forces always insist on holding the hills that give them a defensive advantage. He observes they only ever think about defense. The Margrave lays out the battle plan as planned. Their center and right armies will feint while the left wing tears off the enemy's right. The Imperial commands ring out across the field. An officer orders the Iron Cavalry Corps to stand by in the rear, waiting for the perfect moment to enter the front line and crush the enemy's right flank. Then the command to charge echoes across the battlefield as the Griffonian forces begin their coordinated assault. Meanwhile, on the kingdom side, the commander issues precise tactical orders, directing snipers to match their predetermined positions to their assigned numbers and stand by until the signal is given. A subordinate acknowledges the order, and the commander instructs them to relay everything to the entire army as discussed. The tactical map displays the positions: Viscount Hieronymus' army, Viscount Gorman's army, and Baron Solis and Baron Cornell's allied forces. The commander lays out the strategy: overwhelm the enemy's right wing with their main force and destroy them one by one, while keeping the center and left wings just within arrow range to hold them in check and making the right wing appear disorganized. The battle unfolds across the field as Viscount Gorman's army clashes with the Imperial forces in brutal combat, while Viscount Hieronymus' army engages simultaneously. A commander observes that things have come to this as expected, then orders the entire Baron army to prepare for long-range bombardment. The tactical situation becomes crystal clear. Someone notes this is going just as expected. The strategic analysis unfolds. The enemy attacking the right wing numbers 2,000 troops, an overwhelming difference compared to the combined strength of Viscount Hieronymus and Viscount Gorman's forces. On the battlefield, numbers are power, and besides that, the morale of each Viscount's army is low. The prediction continues that once both Viscount's lines collapse, the Empire will send in the Iron Cavalry Corps to deliver the finishing blow, then strike the main camp's right flank, which will be left wide open. On the hilltop overlooking the battlefield, one of the commanders states it's only a matter of time now, and the other confirms with a simple yes. The two warriors stand side by side, watching the battle unfold exactly as predicted. Down on the battlefield, Viscount Hiyurimi's army is in complete chaos. Soldiers are crying out that they can't hold any longer, that the enemy numbers are way too many. Someone desperately yells asking if there's no order to retreat. The combat just keeps raging on with brutal intensity, and soldiers are getting struck down left and right in the melee. Meanwhile, at the Graphonia Empire Army headquarters, an officer observes that one side has already begun to collapse. Another officer notes that the other side seems to be holding out rather defiantly, though with less than half their numbers they don't stand a chance. Then, an Imperial commander starts shouting orders to half encircle and surround those stubborn bastards, crushing them completely. At the same time, Viscount Gorman curses the damned opportunist as a pathetic fool, his armies struggling hard under the coordinated Imperial assault. Gorman's forces report they can't hold any longer, and at this rate they'll be surrounded by 2,000 enemies. A blonde warrior fights desperately in the chaos, and a commander grimly accepts that it has come to this. The Imperial banners advance as someone gives the order to fall back while maintaining the line. Meanwhile, from the observation point, reports start coming in rapid succession. Viscount Hiyurimi's army is collapsing. The Solis Cornell baronial allied force gets identified on the battlefield, and then Viscount Gorman's army is also retreating according to plan. A subordinate turns to Weiss, asking if it's about time, and Weiss confirms with a simple yeah. Then Tachyon commands them to give him the signal. A signal device catches the light, ready to flash the predetermined message across the battlefield. The narration declares that a new history begins here, and in this brief symbolic moment, Anne and young Tachyon are shown standing by windows in what appears to be peacetime, representing the future he's fighting to create. The moment finally arrives. Weiss says it's about time and declares they're doing this right now. Meanwhile, Tachyon reflects that it was just about to begin, the thing they'd all been waiting for. The commanders stand ready, all of them prepared for this decisive moment. Tachyon, Weiss, Dalek, Klaja, and Chris, every single one of them locked in and ready to go. At the Graphonia Empire Army headquarters, Marquis Gort's officers watch what they believe is the enemy's panicked retreat. One officer points and tells the others to look at their pathetic panic. Another praises the Marquis, saying it's all thanks to His Excellency's cunning and elite troops. Confident in their apparent victory, an officer suggests perhaps it's about time they deliver the finishing blow to those fools. Meanwhile, a signal flag is raised in the background. The Iron Cavalry charges forward at full speed. An Imperial commander on the ground yells orders to crush the enemy's right wing, circle around behind them, and bring the Margrave's head to him. But at the same time, Weiss calmly states they'll start with the isolated small force on the enemy's far right. The Imperial commander roars with complete confidence, ordering his forces to crush them all. Suddenly, the kingdom forces realize the Iron Cavalry is charging straight toward them. A soldier yells in panic that it's the Iron Cavalry, another cries out that they're coming this way. Someone desperately asks about reinforcements from the center, but a commander responds that they can't move the center or the Margrave will be targeted. Young Tachyon observes the battlefield, noting how the situation is changing in the blink of an eye. Someone urgently asks if Lord Darren gave any instructions. The camera focuses on what appears to be Weiss in profile, contemplative. Below, 6 armored soldiers stand ready, their faces showing various expressions ranging from tension to determination as they await orders. Tachyon stands at the fortification, barking orders to his troops, telling everyone to check their arrows and get ready to fire, making it clear they need to stay inside the walls and not come out until they hear the signal. He mentions that his father has stood at this exact spot many times before, and now the soldiers wait tensely behind the wooden walls. Then the signal arrives. Meanwhile, someone spots movement in the distance and wonders what it could be, a figure charging forward across the battlefield. Tachyon recognizes who it is and calls out to Lord Dalek. Tachyon gives the command to aim for the head of the enemy group on his signal, his heart pounding as he watches the Iron Cavalry charging across the plains in the distance. Everyone around him is watching and waiting, and despite all the tension building inside him, the moment feels eerily quiet. Weiss stands beside Tachyon and tells him that if they just calm down and do this, they can win this battle. Tachyon admits to himself that he's scared, clenching his fist, but looking at Weiss and feeling the weight of the moment, his face sets with determination. Then Tachyon draws his bow and declares that he's made up his mind too, his eyes wide with focus and resolve as he prepares to fire. Weiss yells out tactical directions, telling Tachyon to aim 2 o'clock to the right and fire now. Tachyon responds, telling everyone to believe in him. Both commanders move in perfect coordination as the decisive moment finally arrives. Then Takiel fires his arrow. The moment feels absolutely massive as he thinks about himself and his brother standing together at this exact spot. The caption reveals this is a few months before the war even began. Meanwhile, back at the Solace Barony mansion courtyard, one of Takiel's siblings is practicing magic. The sibling asks if their magic is completely useless. Light magic isn't an attack, they explain, just a diversion at best. Another sibling who walks the path of the sword questions why they got stuck with such a petty trick instead of fire or lightning. The magic user admits it's literally just sending out light and won't cause any damage even if it hits someone directly. A third person chimes in, saying they understand how the magic user feels. Someone asks if the magic user can try it here and now. The youngest sibling tells their big brother to wait up. The magic user explains they're just going to make the light fly. The sword user suddenly realizes the light can actually fly and move around. The magic user creates a glowing orb of light in their hands, demonstrating the ability. The light orb floats through the air. One observer watches from an elevated position while a girl with long hair looks on. The young magic user moves along with the light. One person finds it amazing while the magic user insists it just glows. The sibling watching declares that their brother's magic is an amazing skill, but the magic user just seems confused by the reaction. Then Takiel pulls them along to report to their father first, and surprisingly, Baron Solis doesn't have any particularly bad reactions to the news. A few days later, during their usual training, the magic user consults their master about the light magic, and the master acknowledges what they've been told. The next day at the training ground on the outskirts of East City, the training continues. The sibling asks their brother to show the master too. Takiel's getting pretty excited about the magic at this point. But no matter how much the magic user consults their master, just glowing won't change anything. The frustrated magic user thinks it's just dazzling and honestly wants to go home. Then someone asks what would happen if they put the light in front of a galloping horse. Suddenly, Takiel's expression grows intense as he realizes the tactical application. He asks the light magic user if they would use this ability on the battlefield. The magic user seems uncertain at first, but then considers the implication. A galloping horse losing its sight, the effects would be immeasurable. After thinking it through, the magic user confirms they would. Someone agrees with Takiel's assessment, and Takiel explains that Lord Dalek's light magic will be a formidable weapon in terms of tactics. The words sink in, and Dalek starts to understand what Takiel was thinking. After that conversation, Dalek trains himself to shoot light further and more accurately. Here's the thing about the strategic value of this plan: mages are rare and valuable beings. Their numbers are limited even within the kingdom, and there are almost none in the Empire. Moreover, most mages inherit their power through bloodline magic, meaning they're typically the head of a noble family or a member of that family. Those of such high status, with the exception of some frontier regions, don't go to the front lines in battle. It's usually impossible for mages to be active on the front lines. In other words, tactics using magic are unpredictable to anyone. The revelation hits hard, especially since light mages are so rare. Meanwhile, Dalek realizes how Takiel sees the whole situation. Standing there alone, Takiel has already accounted for this advantage, but there were also some unexpected and seriously formidable enemies waiting for him. Then a voice suddenly declares they cannot permit Dalek to join the army. The scene shifts to the mansion exterior, where the family stands together: Clyja, the parents, young Takiel in his white cloak, and the other siblings. Someone immediately protests, asking why and calling out to their father and mother. Baron Solis responds that someday Dalek too will stand on the battlefield, but it's still way too early for that. Baron Solis acknowledges that Dalek has worked hard, then tells Takiel to be quiet for a moment. Takiel tries to argue back, saying he's already explained how his brother's light magic is effective against the Empire's iron cavalry. But the parents point out that Dalek is still only 12 years old. Then Clyja drops to her knees, grabbing onto Takiel's clothing and desperately pleading that she doesn't want Dalek to go to such a dangerous place. Takiel calls out to his mother, but the mother addresses Chris instead, warning about indulging a child's stubbornness. Baron Solis just stands there silently with the mansion looming behind him. Then the mother declares loudly that something is not right. Baron Solis and young Takiel both react with shock to her sudden intensity. An internal narration reveals someone's thoughts. At first, they were just jealous of Takiel, but as they watched him work so hard, they realized something important. The questions continue in the narration: what was it that they envied so much? What is Takiel desperately trying to achieve? And why did these feelings cause such frustration? Meanwhile, the scene shows young Takiel studying alone in the library while someone watches from behind a bookshelf. The realization continues: this isn't about pride or appearances, because even they themselves want the same thing. Then the truth becomes clear: everyone wants to protect their family. The dramatic declaration shows the Solis family together, parents and children united. Suddenly, a massive flash of light erupts across the battlefield. Imperial soldiers cry out as the blinding magic hits them. One soldier screams about his eyes while others stumble back in confusion and pain. Chris yells in shock, demanding to know what that light was. But Klyja and the other siblings just watch in stunned silence as the magical attack tears through the enemy ranks. Imperial cavalry soldiers panic and fall from their horses, completely disoriented by the light magic. One trooper screams in terror as he loses his footing. Meanwhile, Kingdom soldiers rush forward trying to intercept them, but someone yells for everyone to stop and stay back. The blinded Imperial cavalry are stumbling around dangerously, unable to see where they're going. Then, the disoriented cavalry soldiers trip and fall into the trenches and obstacles that Takiel's forces had prepared. One Imperial knight notices the trenches too late and grunts as he tumbles in. Another observes that trenches shouldn't be a problem, but the trap becomes clear. These small steps and shallow trenches are obstacles that cavalry could normally avoid without issue, but only if they could actually see them. The blinded soldiers have no way to navigate the terrain, and they're falling one after another into the prepared defenses. The kingdom soldiers erupt in celebration as they watch the iron cavalry collapse. They can barely believe what's happening. Someone asks if they're actually safe now, while another soldier marvels at the scene. The troops realize it was Lord Dalek who unleashed that devastating magic, watching in awe as the supposedly invincible iron cavalry falls apart, one rider after another going down. Dalek stands on the battlefield in his white armor, the young mage having just turned the tide of battle with a single spell. Meanwhile, from Margrave Hasteberg's position, an officer reports urgently about the iron cavalry situation. Another commander observes that Baron Solis has clearly set something up on the battlefield, and the Marquis himself watches the development with a calculating expression. Over at Viscount Hieronymus' forces, the commanders stare in shock at what's unfolding before them. But Count Goat rages from his command position, unable to believe what he's seeing. He screams about his iron cavalry being the strongest force in the army. The reports confirm his worst fear. One-third of the iron cavalry is now out of commission. The Count loses his composure completely, shouting that this is ridiculous and demanding to know how this could happen. Meanwhile, someone approaches a young Dalek on the battlefield and quietly praises him for his work. Dalek calls out to his master, his voice full of emotion. Then Takiel places a hand on Dalek's shoulder from behind and tells him well done, the young mage just standing there in his white armor, having completely changed the tide of battle with his light magic. Takiel tells Dalek to leave the rest to them. Meanwhile, a commander observes that about two-thirds of the enemy remain and orders all units to move on to the next step immediately. Another voice commands all units to prepare for long-range suppression fire. The narration describes Dirk, the eldest son of Baron Solis, in his first battle. This is the man who would later be called the Sword Saint, the Swordsman of Light. Dalek pumps his fists in excitement after his successful attack, celebrating his victory like crazy. But the Imperial soldiers were wounded without even fighting, filled with resentment and humiliation. The scene shows the devastated battlefield with a white bird soaring overhead. Dalek stands among the carnage and calls out to Takiel, telling him he did what he could. The scene shifts to the barony of Solis Manor Council Chamber. Someone announces they'll begin the first regular council. Takiel narrates that soon after his father and elder brother marched to war, he didn't just sit around waiting for news. Before they left, he persuaded his parents to launch a flood defense council. He recalls talking to his mother, showing her his report about old texts warning of floods after a great drought. His parents took it seriously, probably because they had records of both bumper crops and droughts. Takiel's mother addresses Klyja, reminding her daughter that she promised to play quietly in the seat next to her during the meeting. Young Klyja clutches her teddy bear, looking absolutely adorable. The narration introduces her as the Solis family's eldest daughter, Klyja von Solis, 7 years old. So the reason why young Klyja's at the meeting despite her age gets explained. Since her big brother's participating, she wanted to be there too, but she can't leave her mother's side and has to attend anyway. Klyja holds her teddy bear and announces she'll play with Sarah instead. Then someone calls out to Lady Klyja. A young blonde girl appears, introduced as Sarah, daughter of the Baron Cornell branch family. Sarah has an important role as an observer, someone explains. Klyja will be an observer too. Meanwhile, another voice comments that someone really doesn't get it. Sarah apologizes for some reason and says it's fine. The explanation continues. Although Sarah's from a branch family, she's a user of earth magic and the only earth mage in their territory besides Takiel's mother. She's a servant assigned to Takiel's mother, sent to Estel by the kindness of Baron Cornell. Sarah suggests they play after the meeting, and Klyja celebrates excitedly. A commentary section pops up showing Takiel's explanation. The Cornell barony is actually headed by Takiel's mother's younger brother, and the two families have a pretty solid relationship. Apparently, Takyul's mother also sent Sarah along to make things easier for her daughter at her new home. A family tree diagram shows up on screen, mapping out the connections between Baron Solis' family and the Cornell barony. Meanwhile, Raymond stands formally at the head of the council table and announces he'll be presenting the preliminary investigation report. At Lord Takyul's request, he conducted a full investigation and was able to speak with an elder from a village near Mars. The documents didn't contain any mention of heavy rains and floods after the Great Drought, but the result he found was pretty significant. Turns out, on Mars, every 50 to 100 years there's a flood so severe that the embankment straight up breaks. Young Takyul listens seriously to the report, taking in every word. But here's the thing, the fact of these floods themselves has been getting forgotten over the past 20 years since there haven't been any small-scale floods happening. Only the old saying about beware of water disasters after a great drought seems to remain. Once the embankment breaks though, the muddy stream will swallow the entire area and cause absolutely immense damage. Then someone at the table asks if Lord Takyul also noticed this saying. Takyul confirms he did. Takyul recalls remembering it from an old history book, the history of the barony, so half of it's probably lies, and he apologizes for that. Meanwhile, small chibi versions of the council members react positively, calling it a nice legend. But thanks to that legend, the history of the barony has actually been corroborated. Then a map is shown displaying the region. To the east of Esther territory flows this massive river called the Alg River, and on both banks there are these rich granaries. It's no exaggeration to say it's basically the lifeline of their entire territory. Mars is a town sitting right on the banks of this river. Takyul thinks to himself that this town isn't even that old. It rapidly prospered over the last 10 years as a grain collection center, all thanks to the large-scale agricultural development his parents carried out. That's probably why the Great Flood from the legend isn't known to the government. Raymond continues his report. Apparently, small-scale river floods seem to happen somewhere in the entire Esther territory every single year. Since the damage was pretty minor though, the government was also unaware. From now on, they'll keep an eye on towns and villages other than Mars and proceed with the investigation. Takyul thanks Raymond for his report, and Raymond stands in the doorway acknowledging the thanks. Raymond warns that if Mars and its surroundings get submerged by the once-in-a-century flood from the legends, the damage will be way worse than the previous drought. Takyul responds that he's already talked to his brother about securing Earth mages. Once this war wraps up, his brother should be able to send Earth mages over to build the embankment. Sarah tells the council they've got to prevent the flood at all costs. Meanwhile, young Klyja clutches her teddy bear with this super serious expression during the meeting. Then Takyul narrates that he knows the flood's coming next year. He explains the disaster that's headed their way. Next summer, the banks of the Orug River are gonna burst from prolonged rain and heavy downpours. The muddy torrent will swallow up the town of Mars and the scattered villages, claiming a ton of lives overnight. The granary region will be completely submerged in mud, suffering damage that won't be fixable for several years. A chart pops up displaying the crop harvest ratio of Esther territory from the previous history. See, in the previous timeline, when a drought hit throughout the territory and other farmlands became totally unusable, the area around Mars was low-lying and easy to irrigate. The damage there was minimal, representing about 1/3 of the total harvest. That's exactly why Mars became the lifeline for the famine-stricken territory. Takyul realizes this is way too fatal, everything's gonna get swept away by the flood. Then an explanation drops, noting that in this world, water wheels have basically led to other regions developing and growing, which means people don't rely on the Mars area as much anymore. Even with that though, Mars still makes up about 1/5 of the total production. So when the town gets submerged by the flood, the losses are gonna be way bigger than anything in the previous timeline. Since Mars is basically the hub for flour mills that run on water wheels, the damage would be absolutely massive. Later on, someone asks Raymond how his countermeasures are coming along. Takyul's mother reports that they're currently reviewing the waterways and strengthening floodgates at spots where minor floods have already happened. Raymond adds that they're also getting ready for dike construction near Mars. The explanation keeps going about the flood prevention measures. In other areas, they're doing stuff like reviewing waterways and sluice gates, plus stockpiling sandbags. The flour mill can't be moved obviously, but the collection point's being relocated to higher ground. Small Takyul finds the whole thing amazing. Chibai Klyja yells out that Takyul is more of a cheat than a reincarnator, and she declares she'll get rid of it. Meanwhile, Raymond notes that the construction of the embankment will begin once the army returns. Takyul's mother admits they're still fumbling around with the budget and ensuring safety on a large scale, so Raymond asks how much they should implement to be effective. Then Takyul mentions he's always curious about the neighbor's situation, and he asks Raymond what would be the impact on the neighboring Gorman Viscountcy if there was a flood. Raymond explains using a diagram, The other side of the river upstream from Mars is a hill, so it's normally impossible for water to overflow to that side. Takiel's mother seems confused by the question, but Raymond clarifies the concern as Lord Takiel says. It seems the annoying steward won't be coming to complain again. Raymond explains the potential complaint would be something like their embankment causing Gorman's territory to be flooded. Takiel's mother realizes the implication. Then Takiel explains that it seems Gorman has diverted water from the river in that basin and installed several water wheels. Both Takiel and Kalijah react with shock. Takiel complains that for all the complaining Gorman did, they're just copying Esther now, and a note indicates that Nishida's Kansai dialect slips out unintentionally. He explains that after the Great Drought, it seems Gorman built a pumping and power water wheel and installed their own waterways. But the problem is there are many breakdowns, so the operating rate is low. Chibai Kalijah notes she thought so. Raymond admits he's not an expert either, but he's been trying and failing using his light novel knowledge. Then another voice points out there's no way anyone can make something that works by just writing it without even knowing the basics of gears. The narration explains that in the end, this crystallization of technology was created with the help of the craftsman's wisdom. Suddenly, someone calls out to Raymond to wait. Meanwhile, Takiel considers the map showing Estel territory and Viscounty Gorman. He realizes that in that case, a flood could also occur in Viscount Gorman's territory upstream. The information confirms it's entirely possible. There are even places where they've deliberately cut the embankment to divert water. Takiel thinks it's just as he thought. Someone at the council suggests that, well, if something happens to Gorman now, it's their own fault. Takiel reacts with shock at this callous statement. Kalijah calls out to her big brother Takiel. Takiel starts to scold Kalijah, reminding her she promised to be quiet during the meeting. But Kalijah interrupts with a simple question while clutching her teddy bear. If neither river overflows, where does the water go? Takiel freezes. Suddenly, he realizes he completely forgot what would happen if he prevented the flood on Mars, knowing the actual flood points. He never considered the downstream consequences. Est will sink? No, that can't be. Further downstream from Mars is Est, and there are many farming villages even further downstream from Est. Beyond that is Viscount Hyorimi's territory. The realization hits Takiel hard. Maybe he was unconsciously avoiding thinking about it. He can't tell how it'll affect things. The range is too wide, and he doesn't know if he can even move in time. It took his little sister to notice that critical flaw in his planning. Then, in a lighter moment shown in chibi form, voices ask if Kalijah is great and confirm she really is. Someone praises her as expected of Lady Kalijah, and the small girl looks pleased with the attention. Takiel regains his composure and formally explains that they're also investigating that matter. Turns out they've already compiled a list of candidate locations that need countermeasures. Then Takiel wraps up another tutoring session with Sarah when someone notes they need to increase the number of Earth mages being dispatched. The exhausted Sarah looks relieved it's finally over, and there's this dramatic moment where everyone realizes that was way too close. Chibai Takiel thanks Sarah again for helping out the failing students this time, while another Chibai figure remarks that they can just imagine how that whole thing went down. Meanwhile, Raymond gets called about something regarding Viscount Gorman and Viscount Hyorimi. He confirms with Lord Chris, and Kalijah suggests they have Sarah tell her brother about it. Raymond places his hand on the table as he addresses the meeting, acknowledging that given the source of information is an old book, they should understand its credibility limitation. He declares he'll issue a decree to strengthen the dikes and waterways in their territory since there's a real risk of flooding around next summer. A small Chibai figure thanks him for taking action, and then Raymond announces they should wrap up the first regular meeting here. Takiel explains that from next time forward, Lord Darren and Lord Dalek will also be joining the meeting. He notes they've got limited time until next summer, working on papers as he speaks. He's hoping they can discuss more detailed countermeasures going forward, and the narration states that measures against the Great Flood that will strike the Esther territory have only just begun. A few days pass after the meeting, and someone calls out to Lord Takiel. The young lord studying a map showing the Estel territory, his expression locked in and determined. By next summer, he declares to himself, he'll definitely make it in time. Then someone announces a messenger from the fort has arrived. Takiel's face lights up with excitement the moment he realizes it's from his father. He yells that he's coming and rushes toward the entrance. Meanwhile, an overhead view shows a carriage rolling up to the estate with multiple figures gathered around. Dalek, Kalijah, and Sarah are among those present. The messenger announces they're reporting from the battlefield. The messenger from the battlefield arrives with urgent news. She announces that Count Hasteberg's army at Southern Gate Fortress has engaged the Griffonian Empire's Count Goat's army. Young Takiel's eyes go wide with shock at the report. But then the messenger continues with excitement in her voice. She reports that Lord Dalek, Baron Solis' eldest son, contributed greatly to the victory despite it being his first battle. The enemy's iron cavalry unit was completely annihilated by the Solis Baron's army. The messenger declares their army has achieved a great victory. All the soldiers of the Baron's army are safe, with only a few injured. Takiel's mother covers her face with her hands, completely overwhelmed by emotion. Meanwhile, small Takiel calls out to her while Sarah watches from the background, and the mother's face shifts to pure relief as she realizes Derek is safe. In a smaller, quieter moment, the family gathers together, and the mother thinks to herself that Baron Solis is probably gonna be jealous when he finds out she was only worried about their eldest son. Then young Takiel asks if dad and big brother are coming home. Someone asks Baron Solis if he's actually coming back, and he confirms that he is. Takiel immediately asks him to buy lots of souvenirs, but Baron Solis just chuckles and says he might not have any souvenirs. Naturally, Takiel protests, asking why not. Moving on, the news reaches the city of Est and the people absolutely rejoice. Throughout the territory, Seiken food gets served and all the towns and villages celebrate together. The families and lovers of the soldiers finally breathe a sigh of relief. The narration notes this is the fourth of the 5 great calamities of the previous era war. Young Klyja and Takiel nuzzle together affectionately, and the Solis family gathers in their home with Raymond standing to the side, Anne in the doorway, the mother holding young Takiel, Klyja beside them, and maids smiling in the background. Then the declaration rings out, evasion successful.